You, Mayor Andrew. I'm not in. Sorry. Are we still doing the 3 for, 3 against, or on really significant issues? Will everyone have a chance to use their 2-minute debate?
It's very clear in standing orders that's there to be used when the chair sees it appropriate.
Yeah, you can choose to relax those standing orders for that if you so wished. I just think that some of the items are of such public significance they would expect to hear from elected members.
The debate is for members to convince councillors. The debate time isn't to make a public statement about where you stand on issues. So,
in that case, if you're trying to persuade councillors, then everybody should have an equal say.
look, it's your standing orders. It's clear in the standing orders how it stands. This isn't something that it's for the chair who's chairing the meeting to decide on that one because it's a standing order.
You can relax that standing. You can make the rules as chair about the standing orders.
And I will,
Anyway,
as I have up until now when I feel it's appropriate.
Yeah. I'm only talking about the big ticket items.
Okay. We're going to hand over to these guys for an update, but before we do, I've got something I need to say. So during the 10-year plan debate last week, there was discussion about proposals to redevelop Garden Place. Among questions about the design put forward, I was asked about the involvement of Brian Squire, Board Chair and Director of Chow Hill Architects Limited. I said Mr. Squire felt he could not improve on the designs, and my further comments would have given the impression the proposal Council was considering was endorsed by Mr. Squire and by implication Chow Hill Architects. Mr. Squire spoke with the Hamilton Central Business Association some months ago about ways to improve Garden Place. Following those discussions, Mr. Squire provided the Hamilton Central Business Association with a high-level sketch. In discussions with the Hamilton Central Business Association, I understand Mr. Squire became aware of a more detailed design by Edward White Architects as part of the Stark-McLennan proposal. At that stage, Mr. Squire told the Hamilton Central Business Association he was not in a position to develop his initial sketch into a more detailed concept plan, and was supportive of Mr. Stark's attempt to revitalise Garden Place. Mr. Squire had not seen the design itself, so my comment that he or Chow Hill supported the design was an error. It was not my intention to suggest this. I unreservedly apologise to Mr. Squire and the board of Chow Hill for any confusion my comments may have made. Thank you. Okay, guys.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. We thought it would be useful before we got into today's proposals, just to recap on where we're at from a financial strategy point of view based on the decisions that have been made to date. Stephen's just going to talk through that, there's a couple of slides on screen briefly, and then I'm just going to talk to you about the sort of one-pager that I've just put in front of everyone this morning by way of a recap. So I'll hand to Stephen first of all.
Afternoon, elected members. Just a reminder that the blue column is our starting position, and the red column is as amended. We've been busy little beavers since the last meeting, catching up and reconciling everything. There's a degree of complexity involved in many of our decisions. In the decisions we have made, we have reduced debt by $25 million, which is shown on the left-hand column there, and we're still able to do our program and balance the books almost at 15.5% rates increase. If we go up, Brett, thank you. There's an ever slight sliver on the balancing the books where we haven't balanced the books, given the degree of where the modelling is at. That's in the realms of a rounding error. So at this point, I wouldn't cause any concern to that. And you'll see on the left-hand side, as I said at the end of the last meeting, the debt to revenue position the debt capacity has been reduced, with the red line getting closer to the 230%. And that's because in our decision making, we removed $76 million of operating revenue and $1.6 million of capital revenue from the 10-year plan program. The 76 million, primarily 63 million of lost revenue from the original proposal of the $5 bin rate, which is 6 million a year, thereabouts, and a further reduction in revenue at the gardens.
Down to $5, is it?
That's right.
10, beg your pardon.
25 down to 10.
Yeah, so reductions in what was the proposed budget, just to be clear.
So the debt to revenue, although debt has decreased, the debt to revenue capacity has reduced because of that loss of income. That's that 2.3 effect that we've talked about a lot during the briefings. So that sums that up.
Wonderful. And the page that I've put in front of you, that's headed community infrastructure. That's, I just want to kind of do a quick recap on that. Because we passed a couple of resolutions last week that talked about reducing the amount of money that was available for community infrastructure. I just wanted to kind of recap so it was clear what the effect of those decisions was. So in that top line, the original community infrastructure capital budget, that 80,512,000, just to be very clear, so that's on page 174 of the report. So that number was the original capital budget proposed in the Mayor's budget. So that 80,512,000. So that's on page 174, that sort of an orangey table. And then we made a number of decisions last week, which add to $37.6 million. And I'm not going to go through each of those, but they were the resolutions made last week. And then there were some resolutions to reduce the community infrastructure budget, which added to $17,300,000. So that was during the debate on the Central City Park. There was a resolution to reduce the amount spent on that, and to reduce the amount spent on that by $8 million of capital, and for that to come off the total available for community infrastructure. And then similarly during the...
Started off at 20 million. We took 8 million off it to take it down to 12, is that right?
Yep.
Then you've double counted the 8 million again. You've taken that off again. Why?
Those are deductions, and those two negatives.
So we have...
But so if you go up, so up in that less commitments already made, the third one down is River Park Extension Central Park.
Yep.
That had been 20 million.
Correct.
It's now 12 million.
Correct.
So that's the 8 million reduction.
Correct.
And the 20 million is in the 80 million at the top.
Correct.
This is going well. And down here, you're taking the 8 million off again, are you?
Yep. So the resolution was to spend $12 million.
Yeah.
But not for that 8 million. For the 8 million saved, not to still be available for other things, essentially. So that's why we've taken the 8 million off the remainder, if that makes sense.
Would accept that you've started with 80 million at the top, which had the 20 million in it.
Yep. So you got the 80 million at the top included 20 million.
Yes.
Right. And so then what we're doing is breaking down that 80 million to what components of it that we've identified. So
okay.
80 million's got 20 in it. Take off 12, you're left with 8. We're not going to leave that 8 just unaccounted for.
Yeah.
What Councillor Jeff put in his resolution was to take that 8 out of the kitty. So the second 8 is removing it from the kitty.
I understand now. Okay. So it's not. Okay. Yep. Got it.
So at the end of this exercise, will you keep that running balance? We've got 17.3 million that we've removed from the community budget. Will we have a figure at the end which might then be available to look at unfunded projects?
Yep.
Is that the intent?
Yep. So if I just work down through the rest of this list, that we arrive at that figure at the bottom of the page.
Okay. Now, if we don't spend all of that, let's say at the end of this process, we end up with 17.3 million, just for argument's sake, that we haven't spent. Does that open the opportunity along the 10-year budget, because we will have a balanced budget? Does that open the opportunity to actually reduce the rates in some of those years, where we've got 3.8 kind of continuing through the rest of the 10-year plan? Does that provide an opportunity, because the interest hasn't been incurred because we haven't borrowed the money, and there will be some maintenance and so forth.
Yep. So
and depreciation that we won't have incurred, which will leave us with, a surplus, if you like.
Yep. So there's a couple of parts to couple of parts of the answer to that, and I'll sort of try my non-accounting way, and then Stephen will jump in if I get it slightly wrong. So essentially, you're correct in terms of the operating costs associated to that capital spend, so the depreciation, the interest, the operating cost of any assets. Yes, that would be saved, and therefore that would be an operational cost which is saved, which is what the rates pay for.
Yep.
It wouldn't really affect the 15.5 because that's paying for the stuff that exists now.
I'm looking further
Yep.
along the 10 year.
Yep.
The 10 year, yep.
So further out, it would potentially reduce our required rates in the future. And then the other, so yes to that part of your question. The other part.
So before you go on to the other part of the question, which wasn't quite as related, is it appropriate that we should be making, if we end up with that, let's say for the 17.3 or whatever figure we land on, is it appropriate to do those adjustments in the long-term plan now for those future years when the rate increases might be able to be less than 3.8?
If I can just cut in here, Sean. In terms of that 3.8, that's an arbitrary number that we had decided as a starting position, and what that 3.8 does is it not only covers any inflationary factors, but it allows us to create a surplus to repay debt. So that number could be whatever you wanted it to be, and I guess the key topic is whether or not how quickly you want to repay debt.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And if let's just add one other point. So I think when Stephen and David presented initially around the 15.5% rates increase, they put up a couple of other scenarios that rates could be lower if we chose not to balance our books for longer. And I think under one of those scenarios was if you took X million dollars out of the unsubsidised capital program, then that would give us more debt to revenue headroom so that we could lower those initial rates increases. We still wouldn't be balancing the books, but in theory we could have a lower level of rates.
Dissipating it along the line somewhere.
Yeah. So I guess that's the other kind of the second part to that.
Just the added complexity is the debt capacity we're trying to create is about creating debt capacity for all that unfunded growth that sits out beyond the 10-year period as well. We have other capital requirements out beyond the 10-year period that exactly the same philosophy in 2012. We were trying to get as much debt capacity, which we achieved. We brought our debt right down to try and make sure we have the capacity for the next bow wave that's coming through as well. So that's just another consideration to park at the back of your mind as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so if I just sort of finish off what's on this sheet here. So those two resolutions around to reduce the community infrastructure budget by 17.3 million. So that so where we're at currently is there's $25.5 million, I guess, left in from what was the proposed community infrastructure capital budget. There's two more funded proposals on the list which have a capital which would be classified as capex in that community infrastructure budget. So there's the Rototuna community facilities and the Pooches and Parks. So the Rototuna community facilities is showing a figure there of 18.5 million. That's reflecting the earlier decision to take $2 million from that and apply it to playgrounds. So if we assumed that those funded proposals remained funded, then the figure at the bottom of the page, $6.9 million, that's the amount that's remains available for any unfunded proposals at this stage.
Just check, in terms of the 17.3 million, Richard's gone, was that expressed in the two resolutions that that money not be used? Because technically, if a member comes up with another project or another different proposal and wants to support a non-funded proposal to be funded, that 17.3 million is still there unless those two resolutions expressly said as part of the decision that money be used to pay down debt.
So I'm just finding that they did say that. I'm just finding them.
It's the very last page.
While you're looking for that, Sean, my interpretation of that would be that as there's a resolution to reduce, it can also be one to increase. So as you were going through the list and you found if you wanted to include a project that needed to be funded, you would just...
Oh yeah, I understand that. I'm just wanting it very clear that both those resolutions said the words to the savings that they were looking for is to pay down debt, and Councillor Taylor is nodding that they did. So yeah.
Just for clarity, if I can, so under the River Plan Central City Park, the Roman numeral 6 of that resolution was that the overall budget for community infrastructure is reduced by $12 million, 8 million capital expenditure and 4 million operating expenditure. That's the 8 million that's reflected in here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then, the gardens one said something similar.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so that was
So what was the answer to Angela's question? Yes, we can use the money, or no, we can't?
sorry, can you just repeat the question then?
Yeah, sorry.
Please.
What you just read out actually said that both those resolutions were looking to reduce the budget, but for those projects, so reduce the Central City Park River project to 12 million, reduce it by 12 million, reduce it to 12 million. That actually doesn't necessarily say and to pay off debt. It doesn't allocate the savings. So can you just have a look at that again for me? Perhaps I need to... There's another one. The central... Okay, so...
Community budget.
But so it comes out of the community budget to where though? It needs to be resolved to go somewhere. Otherwise, it's still...
Has someone got the...
No, so the key motion there, or the key resolution was, it's the last one in the list, and it said that the overall budget for community infrastructure is reduced by $12 million, 8 million capital expenditure and 4 million operating expenditure. So that was... Which one's that? The gardens or the... That's the Central City Park one. The gardens one. There is. Okay. I'll read the whole thing out. I'll read the whole motion out. So that the council approves funding provisions in the draft 2018 to 28 10-year plan for the development of a central city park between Victoria on the River and Embassy Park as follows. 1. Total capital expenditure of $12 million in the first 5 years of the 10-year plan, 2018-19 to 23-24. 2. Operating expenditure of $300,000 in year 1, 18-19 for development of a master plan for the urban park. 3. Operating expenditure of $1.8 million in year 2, 2019-20, and $4.2 million in year 3, 2020 to 21 for removal of the buildings. 4. An allowance to write off building assets of $4.5 million in year 2, 2019 to 20, and $8.45 million in year 3, 2020 to 21. 5. Consequential operating expenditure of $55,000 per annum from year 4, 2021 to 22, to maintain the new assets following completion of the project. And 6, that the overall budget for community infrastructure is reduced by $12 million, 8 million capital expenditure and 4 million operating expenditure.
Can I just, I think I'm pretty clear on that, but can I just go to governance managers just to make sure that that resolution is intending to do what it's hoping to do by cutting the remaining 17 million? Is that?
I don't think it's my role to interpret a resolution, sorry, Councillor.
Okay.
So with the Gardens resolution, there were questions asked at the time, which Chief Executive responded to clarify that was reducing the total capital, money available for capital budget by that amount. So the question was asked, I think, by Councillor Paula during the debate on the Gardens item, and Richard responded to say that was reducing the total amount available.
Yep. So the reason there's nowhere else it can come from, because basically the capital budget gets funded out of debt. So by reducing the capital budget in total, you're effectively not spending as much debt. So by inference, it has to be out of debt. So that's the first part. And the reason that's important is effectively with the way the Mayor Andrews budget was created, it was created with effectively an allocation of $80 million towards community infrastructure, and what Councillor Jeff wanted to achieve was that part, was a net saving. So that's what they achieved. Having said that, if during this process council wants to increase the community infrastructure budget, council has to make an active decision to do so. It's just not assumed that the money left over from Councillor Jeff's decision is free floating to be tagged to some project. It's actively got to make a decision to increase the amount of money allocated. There's my take on it, Councillor Sean. You're not a councillor, GM Sean.
I agree with you, boss.
So from an arithmetic point of view, the community budget now sits at 63,212.
63 million.
63,212. So your chart here isn't that clear on that. But if you take the 17.3 off the 85.12, we now have our community budget as it stands today, after those two resolutions, of 63.212 million. Am I right?
I haven't done the sums, but that's it.
But I just took those two figures away.
That back of the envelope.
Yes,
sounds right. Yes.
It's right to say, subject to any councillor getting a majority here, that can be put straight back in again, can't it?
Yep.
And it was important that Councillor Jeff put that on board, otherwise you wouldn't have seen
So the ratepayers are still not safe.
Yeah, it was important that Councillor Jeff put that forward, because ultimately it provides certainty from a modelling point of view that we aren't just having a capital budget allocated of $80 million. We needed to actually reflect what you saw in that previous slide, the increased debt capacity through Councillor Jeff's decisions. That's why it was important that Councillor Jeff put that through. It's also important for councillors to signal their intentions, and that's what was done.
So, Sean, could you read that last clause off that Jeff Taylor resolution again, please?
So, in respect of the Central City Park resolution, it was that the overall capital budget for community infrastructure is reduced by $12 million, $8 million capital expenditure and $4 million operating expenditure.
So if we voted, Chief Executive, to reduce that, and we voted to lock that in by resolution, can we increase it again at the same meeting? So that's not a direct negative, that's just...
So the 80.5 million hasn't been resolved as a resolution of council's allocation to a capital fund. When council wraps this all up, this spreadsheet can then be, whatever 63 million that Councillor Pascoe is referring to, can be resolved as the total capital fund available for community infrastructure. I'm saying based on the information that...
Or presumably we can resolve to include some of the unfunded proposals in subsequent resolutions, which are the ones listed up over there.
Yeah, I mean...
legally, that's where we are at the moment.
At the moment in time, this is what... Our community infrastructure is $63 million based on the modelling we've done to date, based on all the resolutions that have come through now. And whatever council makes a decision going forward, bearing in mind that we have made a decision regarding specifically $25 million, sorry, less than that, $37 million worth of items being locked and loaded.
Yep.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe just asked my last question. Just wanted to ask about the other things sitting in there, because we made a resolution at the beginning of the day of the hearings of these meetings to accept the budget subject to a whole raft of things, and there's a whole lot of things like the alternative weed control, Mangaiti Sports Park development, but we haven't discussed any of those.
So the resolution towards the start of the day was to accept the operating budget subject to.
Oh, so those are operating budgets?
No, they're not.
No.
So you have made a decision on those. So that was part of the resolution when we talked about renewals, compliance, business improvement items. That was, they were items that were in the bottom half of this table, which we discussed as being part of the funding allocation for compliance and business improvement
So that was part of the renewals and renewals budget?
Yes, it was.
And so it's just wrapped. Oh,
Renewals and business improvement, the alternative weed control was part of business improvement, wasn't it?
Yes.
no, Lance, Scott.
I think people are getting confused. When you pass the resolutions around capital that the other day or the other night, Sean mentioned on the bottom of the community infrastructure 80 million, there was a bunch of projects from Te Manatu Park downwards, and that you were voting to approve those because the rest of them were subject to proposals that you were going to discuss, and you've now been going through those other proposals one by one.
Okay.
And Sean said take those as almost business as usual type projects like Te Manatu, some basic development to get it open so people can fly a kite and walk a dog and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, it's not that I'm unhappy. I missed that. Because I know that Ziggy asked me when she would have a chance to talk to some of things, and I said, well, that will come. But obviously, I overlooked that small decision that we made. But no, that's fine. It clears it up for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Siggy, you will get a chance at the end when we wrap up to talk to your...
It's Mayor Andrew, but it doesn't matter.
You will get a second chance to talk to those things if you want to. Councillor Jeff.
Yeah, quick question, and it might be a silly one. The 6.9 million at the bottom there, which is the remaining budget after funded proposals. So if we were to go through this process and not allocate this money, does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean it can go back to repay debt, or is there a sort of implicit understanding that it has to go in the budget somewhere in the community?
As things stand, that would just go back to repay debt.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Siggy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Look, well, that might be, some of the things I might have misunderstood as well. But what I want to ask is, so after the public consultation, so we're going through this process now, and then we're deciding on making decisions, but we also put it out to the public. And after the public consultation, we decide, because the people don't want certain items in the budget, we decide to take them out. Can we then add on other things to the list that we can't get on this time?
They would need to be things which form part of the consultation. So what we're approving now is the draft budget, and the draft budget is what we base the consultation document on. So after this, we go away and prepare the consultation document. It includes the kind of major issues on which we're consulting, Council's proposed solution to address those issues, which is primarily the budget. We also present alternatives, alternative options for addressing those issues. But then the public are also welcome to submit on all manner of things, basically. So at that point, the items that the public have submitted on are included in the deliberation conversation, essentially.
Okay. Now the other question is also, so if we don't get some of the items on the budget for the long term, the 10-year plan, can they be put on a plan for the yearly plan? Annual plan, sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we review the plan every year by way of the annual plan. So we take the 10-year plan as being the plan unless something changes, essentially. So it's usually by exception that we change the annual plan, but there is the opportunity to do that. Through
so nothing is really totally 100% in concrete.
I don't want to give the impression that it's completely fluid and we can make changes all the time whenever we want, because
also at the same time it's not totally in concrete either. Is that?
Yep. So we can. That is the purpose of the annual plan, is to make changes on a yearly basis to reflect that things might have changed in the year.
Because the world's changing all the time,
Correct.
so we need to be flexible. And didn't we always talk about being nimble? Is that right?
Agile.
Are we still nimble? Yes. Agile, whatever it's called, but...
Yeah, so just be, when we go out to consult, that represents a point in time. And if the community comes back with something that's not in wasn't in our consultation document or changes it, we can consider it. But if it's significant, we might have to reconsult again.
Okay.
Okay, so there's an aspect that there's thresholds for our significant engagement policy to the extent to which we have to re-engage on certain things. The goal is that council puts its best foot forward through consultation, community has their views, and effectively it's moving against those views that the change will be. Councillors can't reintroduce a new point at that stage.
Okay. Unless the community might come to us with something that they wanted. Through, yeah.
They can't come to you individually, it's got to come through
Yeah.
consultation. Responsive submission, that's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Isn't it more accurate to say the council has no money? Every part of our capital budget is funded through debt. So if we reduced part of our capital program, which this does in some respect, we don't pay off debt. We don't have to incur so much debt.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the second process is everything is subject to council majority. So the money that Jeff, God bless him, is eliminated from the capital budget such that it does not have to be borrowed, could be put back in again by 7 councillors. 7 arms in the air could put it straight back in again, couldn't they?
Yes.
Either now or after we've heard the public's views.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
How can we put things back in that didn't go out to consultation? You said either now or after the public said their view.
Well, I assume someone could say one of these unfunded things, I want to put it, let's fund it, which would revoke, which would undo some of the lessened borrowing that we have occurred now.
Yep. I think once it's out of consultation, it requires, as Councillor Leary said, someone to make a submission through the hearing process for a change to be made at that stage. Council can't just off their own back reintroduce without testing something with the community.
The council can write a submission for residents to put in.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment to that effect, but
Well, you can. I mean, you can. You don't have to not comment or comment on it. It's true. You can.
Yeah. Anyway.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Deputy Mayor.
We're all citizens.
That's right.
Stating the obvious, take Garden Place an example. All you're doing in the proposal, the proposed LTP, is you are proposing a quantum of money be allocated for a Garden Place redevelopment. And the concept is there, but obviously if council then determines to approve it, it will look at submissions and it may or may not redesign the actual micro detail of a particular project, be it the library and the Rototuna or the Garden Place design, is actually negotiated outside the LTP. What all we're doing now is we're just allocating some funding allocation tagged against a project. Is that correct?
Yes.
And secondly, if we lift an unfunded item, once we've heard submissions and we've reflected and we do something that it was not in the draft budget or it was in the unfunded item, then we receive advice from the Chief Executive as to whether or not, if we did resolve to do X, whether or not it meets a public consultation threshold, and you can resolve to do X, but it may be the caveat that you have to reopen to that particular topic for a special public consultation process. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Paula.
I agree with those questions. I guess it means, however, that if we're working under a constrained budget, it's less likely that some of these other projects are going to find money to go out in the first place. Will they be listed? Will they be listed, all the things that we're interested in, will they still be listed in unfunded proposals in the plan? Or, no, not the ones that are presently just underfunded, Martin, but the suite that is of interest to council. So, for example, if I lose the vote to open up the front of the library, which potentially will happen, does it at least go out to flag to the public that there was an issue that was discussed by council and is unfunded?
Not everything, but I think major considerations I think would be included. So not every project which doesn't make the cut.
But I can ask. So if I can ask at the time to ensure that that item does get put out to the public. I mean, there's two things. There's the project, then there's the funding. Do you get where I'm coming from? And I want And since we're going to be democratic and allow the public to talk on a suite of funded and unfunded work, just want to make sure they've got the opportunity to put some of the unfundeds in.
So I think when we get to, once we get past the actual approving the draft budget, then we get to talking about the consultation document and what options are, what we're presenting as options to the public in terms of alternative options to address the issues that are in that consultation document. So it's probably at that point that it's relevant.
Okay, Steve, wake up. You're on. We're off. So we're now going to item 7 on page 10, which is in our books. Where are we? Waikato Regional Theatre.
For councillors' information, I've discussed it with the Mayor. We're going to do the Waikato Regional Theatre next, followed by the Rarotonga Town Centre Community Facilities.
We're wrapping up tonight pre-6 o'clock.
And then we're heading, everything being willing, we're going to then go back through the proposals in the order they're currently presented at, barring the ones we've already done, if that suits the council.
So page 107. Okay, so we'll take the document as read. We will. Can we have the motion on the board, please, Becca? So the motion is moved by myself as on page 10 and seconded by the Deputy Mayor, but the amounts in I is changed to 25 million from 20. Sorry?
107, page 107.
So
Pages aren't quite the same.
And you're putting that the revised motion,
and
25
yep.
million.
And Councillor Ange has an amendment on this, which could go up to, please. So, just so everyone's clear, on page 107, it's the motion as it is, but I is changed to 25,000.
Million.
25 mil, okay, and then Angela's motion is different, so that will go up on the board so that you can see it. So work off. I understand there's more than one amendment on this, is that right? So could I just ask Dave and Ange to get together for a couple of minutes to see if there's similarities here?
Sorry, are you doing the rec centre?
No, sorry, we're on the theatre.
No, not,
okay.
Not me.
Does anyone else have an amendment on this one? Okay.
We're putting a hoop in.
Question on your one, because I may withdraw my amendment. So I put my amendment up for the full 30 million, which is what we committed to in principle, because I didn't want us to fall short, but you've gone up 5 million. Can you just explain that?
Just at the Mayoral Forum this morning, I believe there's a reasonable chance that the region is going to come up with the other $5 million. It's not locked in, but I am reasonably comfortable that that's where we'll end up, as this being a regional facility.
And the remaining 5 million of the initial 30 that we committed?
Momentum, Hamilton Council and the neighbouring council were committing the 30 million. So it was our job to negotiate and talk with our local councils to raise money towards our 30 million. Momentum's job is to negotiate and have access to everybody else, like Lotto, like central governments, which we know they're talking to, and other funders that we would keep out of that. But I'll hand over to Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Andrew. Look, it's a bit of a moving feast still, because as you'll appreciate, we are looking to seek for some additional funding from regional council and or surrounding councils for this. They are all going through their own long-term plan process just the same as we are, all at the same time. So it's a bit of a slight bit of cat and mouse, if you like. So Momentum Waikato, with our support, has put a proposal through to the Waikato Regional Council. It's also had conversations with the immediate council surrounding us, and the nature of our discussions at this stage suggests that there may be potentially maybe a possibility of a placeholder being put in the Regional Council long-term plan for funding to be tagged for the theatre. But that is something that is provisional at this stage, and we just have, all I'm saying is we have a better indication of where the final figure may rest for that. But that will be subject to support from surrounding councils, to the Regional Council and the Regional Council themselves actually voting that through. So it's a difficult thing for us to try and give a hard and fast figure right now, but we feel that 25 million is probably more prudent at this point in time. The original resolution from council was for 30 million, but that was before any contributions from our partner councils. So I'm sorry if there's been any confusion on that. We're just trying to get it as tight as we can.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm just confused by the wording here on page 7 and in fact on page 107. It talks about an operating expenditure of 20 million spread over years 1, 2 and 3. Is that, first of all, I'm confused because it's called operating, which sounds to me, I always thought it was a grant towards a funding of the building of the thing.
Yeah, through the chair, look, it would come out of our operating grants because it's not a asset that we are purchasing or will have on our balance sheet, so it has to come out of our operating funds.
Oh, okay, so I understand. So that's right, because we're not going to have any ownership in it, are we?
No, it's not. It's not a capital item on our.
So
part.
it's just a straight out. So it'll be an expense.
That's
and,
right.
And those years, okay. Yeah. And is that evenly spread? 6.6.
No, it's slightly spread out to sort of match the build plan and construction and finalisation process.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, so that's the 20 million, which is possibly now changing to 25. Is that right? So initially that was 30. It's down to 20 in this document, and then I didn't quite listen to what Angela was saying. You're suggesting it goes to 25, are you, Angela?
No, 30.
Well, I need to get clear on
yeah.
the new number.
Okay, yeah. but so that 20 is the figure that's in flux at the moment.
That's correct.
So 6 months ago that was 30 million, and Momentum we're going to get 20 million or 25 million.
Yeah, they'll be getting
okay, all right. Well, it's just visibility for what the community understands, because the figures are changing a wee bit. Okay, so the 20 millions, just to be clear, could be 25.
So the Mayor's motion is putting forward is 25 million, and that's based on the Mayor's discussion with the Mayoral Forum this morning.
We should forget about the 20 million for the moment.
20 million was our hopes that we could secure $10 million from the region. And that was a starting point for discussion. That's what we locked into the 10-year plan. The Mayor's latest intel from his discussion this morning with the Mayoral Forum, there seems to be a level of support, even though it hasn't been back to their particular councils yet, for a 5 million contribution from the region. So that's reduced that figure from 30 million to 25 million.
Okay. So the net cost to us could still be 20 million on the assumption that our neighbouring councils pay 5 million.
No, so the total contribution is 30 from TLAs, and then less 5 million coming from a regional fund of some variety, which Sean could probably talk to in a bit more detail, leaves us with a contribution of $25 million.
Okay, so 25 is our net amount.
That'll be the least amount we'd have to contribute.
Yeah, so it'll be 25 million and up.
Yeah, but we're fairly confident that
are you?
Fairly confident.
This
Not really. That's less than
this
really.
Is on tape.
That's less than really confident.
Okay. All right.
You don't show your hand. So I think Richard is, with respect through the chair, has given you some very good ideas. Do not show your hand all the time.
And of course, this is public money.
We want
to keep that hidden and all that sort of stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've got an annual. Okay, this is where it gets confusing. Next, Romans 2, we talk about an ownership grant.
No, we've corrected that.
Where
If
on
you
earth
read
does
it,
that wording get?
it's operating grant.
Oh, okay, all right.
Is that right?
Okay, so that's an
So-
operating grant, which is for,
Could I just clarify that, please? It is the purpose of the grant, and I understand the ownership, the word ownership is an unusual one, but we are not going to be subsidising the day-to-day, through that amount, the day-to-day operating of the theatre. The idea of that particular annual grant is to contribute towards the cost of the theatre's upkeep, asset management and renewal, which is very, very specific and quite separate to the day-to-day operations.
so they are the sort of obligations that you would have as an owner?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct, because that is actually the most important part of the risk management of the ongoing success of the theatre, is to make sure that it is properly maintained and everything else. The operating side, we want to keep it quite separate so that the two don't get mixed up and the core asset isn't put at jeopardy.
Okay, so that's a $22 million obligation over the 10 years of the 10-year plan, which would be,
Over the 20 years.
yeah, for 20 years, yeah, sorry, of which
but
half of
10
it is in
years,
the first
yeah.
10 years, beg your pardon, yeah. So, and that would be, okay, so we are not exposed to any operating deficits,
Correct. That's the responsibility of
but we will
the
be,
trust.
in reality though, if, and I respect the people who are running this, and they're some smart people, but no one can control everything in the future. If the theatre does start running at losses, where do you expect the trust to come to?
I would assume, as has been the case in other examples, that they would come to us for a conversation, without a doubt. But I'm sure they would also have the same discussion with other co-funders in the project as well. But to be realistic in these sorts of situations, from what I can see or have read and sort of researched, they will come to council.
But Sean,
if that happened.
Sean here, the view is to draw as strong a line under that as possible at this point in time.
Totally.
I mean, there's so much you can do in the
Those
future.
lines don't count for anything.
But
We
if you
all
don't-
know that.
But if you don't have a contract entering into this, and
Okay,
it
so
might,
it's not, we're not contractually obliged to pay any, well, we
No,
would not be
that's correct.
contractually obliged to do anything.
we're going to have a contractual obligation to the extent we contribute an ongoing grant for a period of time, and we'll negotiate that, and we'll make a contractual contribution towards the 30 million, whatever, or 25 million, whatever shape that forms. Beyond that, and there may well be expectations placed on them as contractually expectations to prove the ongoing budgetary management and forward forecasts and so forth like that.
Correct.
We'll put all that into the document and so forth. But in the end, when if the wheels fall off, then it's like any other community activity that when the wheels fall off, and they'll look at supporters from around the community to support them.
Will we, if the alternative, the other funding, which Momentum are getting, is from a whole lot of people, if any of it, will this council have a view if any of that funding comes from pokey trusts? Is anything within our policies?
No, because we won't actually be receiving the money ourselves. It would be received by the trust or Momentum that is pulling this project together. We are the single largest contributor to the project, but there are a lot of other contributors that are going to fund the other $45 million that have to be raised. So we won't be a recipient. So as far as I know, and I'm stand to be corrected, our own policy with regards to that doesn't apply, because we're not the recipients.
So we'll be agnostic to wherever they get the money
we're
from.
not the recipients of the money ourselves.
Just in Councillor O'Leary, just in terms of your resolution, I just note that you're referred to capital funding in here, because we don't own the asset at the end, they'll have to say operating funding.
Yeah, no, look, I think we're on the same page, so I'll just tease that out with a few questions and then probably withdraw my amendment.
Keep going, Ange.
Yeah, thank you. So,
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Gary, you done?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So another way, because that's all I'm looking for is that we committed to, in principle, to the 30 million. All I'm looking for is that we stick with that commitment, and I think that what I'm reading is right. So there's 25 million in years 1, 2 and 3 from us, and an indicative 5 million coming from the regional council. So that's through the development. So that's what I'm looking for. If that falls away, then we may re-look at it again. But that's actually really positive significant step forward. So just a couple of questions. Raising this then from the 20 to the 25 million, what's the impact on rates over the 3 years, in particular year one, because we're facing a 15.5%?
Steve, this is a question for you.
On rates, because it's coming out of the operating expenditure, which is rates.
So we're balancing the budget.
So we won't be.
Andrew, I might come back to you while they
Okay,
model
yep.
it up. And as soon as, Stephen, as soon as you've got it modelled up, just interrupt where you are.
Okay, and just one or two other questions. It's my understanding that that in phase two, and in the agreement with Momentum, that we were to approach, within our 30 million, we were to approach regional councils, TLAs and central government funding streams. Mayor Andrews indicated that we're not doing that, so can you just have some comment on that, Sean? Because that was
Yeah, certainly.
in the agreement.
Well, the resolution wasn't necessarily that we would be approaching, but it was certainly that anything that came from local government, neighbouring local government or central government would be taken off our amount. The reality is that we've actually been, as a part of the offer from Momentum, is they have been fronting the approaches for the project because they are the driver of the project. They're taking the leadership role, so they have been engaged in the conversations with the likes of the regional council and some of the councils that surround us that may have a contributing part, and we've been supporting them. But they have been very, very good in terms of going out and representing the total project with our support. As far as the central government line goes, Momentum are very active in that space at the moment, and they have some great support from other parties in the city and in the region, that are leading that charge. In terms of how that, where the funding, if it comes through from central government, lies, it's my understanding is that it will now rest with the Momentum amount of money that has to be raised. Bearing in mind they are looking to have to raise around $45 million.
Yeah, I think I am disappointed to hear that, because they, in the agreement that we had with Momentum, they were to approach community philanthropic donors and trusts, and we were, as I said, central government, which would have had, which would have dropped our rates for our ratepayer, and that's the impact and certainly the intention. So I am disappointed to hear that. I want the theatre to succeed, but that's all my questions for now. Yeah, I'll wait for Stephen.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following on from those questions about the regional council and the surrounding districts, has or will Waikato Regional Council put it into their proposed LTP to go out for public consultation?
We had a conversation with them again this morning on that, and they may well put and it's very difficult for me to speak for them because I can't and I shouldn't be, but I'm trying to give you an informed impression. It may well be that they do something like a placeholder and then await formal submissions from surrounding councils registering their support. But that, once again, those councils haven't yet made those formal commitments to do so yet. So we're just in an awkward time frame because of the way we're all lined up on the same sort of schedule.
Yeah, I'm surprised. So there isn't any wording support in either the Waikato District, Waipa or Manamata-Piako District Council's proposed LTPs. There isn't any wording of support in theirs.
Not at this point in time.
Are they considering putting some wording of
support? They may well be, yes.
So I think that's pretty important. Just a point
of clarification there, all it would take is a resolution from those three councils to come back and instruct a regional council. So they don't actually need to bring this into the 10-year plan. It's not part of their 10-year plan. It's through a regional
No, but they can put support because it's the same. Look, I've been through this with a couple of other regional fundings before, and it helps a lot. But I'll talk about that in my debate. Operating, just in terms of the wording. So the reason we call it in Romans numeral 1 operating expenditure is because we're giving that money and we don't expect to retain any ownership of the facility. So it's operating budget. Yeah?
Correct.
So so as Angela says, it does come from the rate take directly, not debt. And an annual ownership grant, see, then I was confused. I thought, what's an ownership grant if we're not owning? What's an annual ownership grant?
Yeah, look, we need to get a better wording for that, but as I said before, it's towards the cost of ownership.
I understand what it's for, but I think it's misleading, the wording, because on the one hand you're saying to the public we're not going to own it, and then you're saying, yes, but we're going to support it over within some sort of operational grant.
Yeah.
We're calling it an ownership grant.
We need to find a different word for you. It's actually to assist the trust who will own the theatre.
No, it has changed operational.
Yeah, no. Once again, that's not
Is it?
quite. That's not.
Sorry, I can't see it, but
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Yes, I mean, obviously, just to reconfirm that we put a quantum in anticipation of the region realising their moral obligation. And if for any reason...
Deputy Mayor, question.
Well, the question is, if we're, this is a proposal, and then the final quantum is finalised, obviously, next year, subject to those negotiations.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor James.
Sean, welcome back. Hey, look, if we're approaching the Waikato Regional Council and they're looking at funding this, is there a risk that the Hamilton ratepayer could be hit twice?
That's a part of our discussions that we're having with them, so we're aware of that issue, so we're talking that one through with them as well.
Okay. On another side note, how's Claudelands doing?
Right now, fine.
Hang on, stop, off subject.
No,
Next
it's all part of the subject here. I'm trying to get to it. So I'm wanting to know...
Well, we know how Claudelands is going, so move on to
Okay,
the next
I'm wanting to know if the new centre here is opened, the new regional theatre, would we be robbing Peter to pay Paul by taking acts away from Claudelands to the new regional theatre?
Pre-closure of Founders, the answer to that would be obviously no. There are a couple of performances that have stuck to Claudelands as a result of Founders closing, but overall we have lost most of the business now over time that Founders did attract because Claudelands just simply isn't the right model. Those shows or events that were Founders based that we are operating at Claudelands that we would lose, I would say categorically that would not necessarily, it would impact on utilisation, but it would not impact on our bottom line.
Okay. Are there any acts that the regional theatre could hold that the Gallagher Performing Arts Centre could similarly hold?
Yes, there are some, but once again it comes back to the Gallagher Performing Arts Centre and the theatres that are there are very, very special and specialised, and they're quite intimate and quite small. And so generally speaking, the sort of event that would take place are really looking for that sort of an atmosphere that those rooms deliver. The theatre that we're talking about, the Waikato Regional Theatre, will be much, much larger size, larger scale in terms of staging, the sheer size of the performance groups and so forth. So, you could argue, yes, there could always be the odd group here or there, but they are very, very different beasts.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Robb.
The previous promise that we made, and I think we have a resolution, was for a $30 million payment. We've now proposing to change that from 20 now today to 25. Does that, and this is a question perhaps for governance, does that mean we have to go back and rescind our earlier motion to make available the $30 million?
I need to review the specific wording of that resolution, Councillor Pascoe, so I can do that.
Yeah, look, it's not a die in the ditch.
If I may add through the chair on that, if for example, HCC were to deliver $25 million and another $5 million came from another source, that would be compliant with that previous resolution.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I'm just saying, if the fact that we're only making available 25 when we previously promised 30.
Yeah, but if we are part of getting the other 5, so that it is 30, I think we're compliant with that resolution.
Are Momentum happy with the prospect that the contribution might be lower? If we're offering now 25 and we'd previously offered 30,
well,
Momentum, is it something that could derail the whole project? The fact that we're 5 million, or as we were earlier on, $10 million short in terms of our promise to fund?
Excuse me, Councillor Rob, we've made it really clear. I've just come straight from the Mayoral Forum. In the Mayoral Forum, we have, part of the agreement is that we can approach our surrounding mayors for part of our 30 million.
Okay.
And I'm negotiating through the Mayoral Forum for the other $5 million to bring it up to what our resolution said between us and our neighbouring councils.
So effectively, we're not, if we pass this motion, whether it's 20 or 25, we're not reneging on an earlier promise.
As long as we raise the other money to bring it up to 30 through our neighbouring councils, which is what we're working on.
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to get clarity around that. The second question and the last question is, what does bullet point 3 on 10, which is on page 108, mean? What assets are we going to sell for 6 million? And where is the 7 million from third-party funding?
The Chief Executive's just working on changing the motion to make that very clear. So that'll be up on the board in a couple of minutes. So if we can I'll come back to you once that's on the board, if that's okay on that one.
Okay. So, and I guess when he's back, it would be useful to know how we've actually recorded that in your draft long-term plan, because as I see it, the sale of assets for 6 million doesn't necessarily provide revenue. It's a repayment of debt, which will still mean that our revenue payment of whatever the grant is will have come from the sale of an asset.
Can I come back to you on that one, Rob?
Okay.
Question.
That was the only other question that I had.
So once the Chief Executive is back with the change motion, I'll come straight back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Thanks, Mayor Andrew. My question's around sneaky little Romans 2 there. I seem to remember, and can you please just give me the history on this? I seem to remember when we first heard from Momentum that, hey, it'll be about 70 grand a year. Then I think the last time it was 1 million per year. Now it's 1.1 million per year. What's the history on what we've been, or what the numbers have been around that?
Through the chair, I can't recall the 70,000 a year. I'd need to really go back through my notes and try and understand where that figure came from.
That was left for negotiation between the Chief Executive and Momentum, and that figure has always been 1.1, but once the Chief Executive's back in his chair, I'll come back to you on that question as well.
Thank you.
But if I could add, the business case following Council's resolution and Momentum got underway with the project, they had Deloitte do quite a robust business case. And crunch all the numbers. We gave them all of our numbers. We opened our books for the theatres so they could work that through, and that's where the 1.1 came from in terms of the ownership costs, or the cost of owning the building as opposed to operating it. So I'm very comfortable with how those figures have been derived. And everything else.
So what are the on the ongoing operating grant, or whatever it's called, what are the other numbers around it? I mean, do you know what other councils are putting in, or other?
Well, as a part of the discussions, there's Momentum have suggested, in addition to our 1.1, a further 300,000 from other supporting local government sources.
So would there be a possibility of other councils helping us with that responsibility as well, ongoing? Because that's a
that's what that 300,000 I just mentioned was.
But that comes out of their numbers, not ours, eh? So we couldn't ask them for it to come out of our 1.1.
No, this is in addition to the 1.1, so it's already been stripped out.
Can the general manager, if it's in your head, let us know what the costs of Founders were to keep the doors open? Just to give us a bit of comparison here.
Look, the operating cost was around it's in my head. It was a couple $100,000. You know, it wasn't that high. It was around 300,000, but that excluded renewals.
Yeah.
And all the capital works and everything else, the depreciation, cost of depreciation, and that's what takes it up. And it would have been up around 1.3, I think it was.
But we owned it.
Like
That was the difference, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm just feasting my beady eyes on that one, but okay, that's all I can add at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. I'm not sure who can best answer this, but I'm trying to find out how much the regional fund contributed, this regional same fund we're going to for money for the 5 million, how much that contributed to the velodrome, which was the closest relatable facility I can see to the regional theatre. Do you know?
Wasn't that fund? It wasn't that fund because that regional development fund was not in place at the time.
Well, how much did the regional council collect for it, if we could put it, if I may ask through you?
Yeah, I can't quite remember, to be honest. I'll have to look. I think it was about 6 million.
Out of a 28 million project?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, that's one question. The next one, I'll speak to that later.
Yeah.
Next one, maybe through to you direct, Mr Mayor. The last week we were still trying for 10 million from this regional fund, correct?
Yes.
So how did it go down to 5? What caused that?
It was going to be 10, which would have been targeted rate through the regional council rates, which would have meant that we would have paid 5 of that 10 Hamilton ratepayers. So they were more comfortable with 5 coming from our neighbours rather than...
Yeah, but that 5, that's only really 2.5 from...
No, 5 directly from our neighbours, not from us. 5 from Waipa, Waikato and Matamata Piako.
Just those 3, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood the earlier answers because it seemed to me that there was going to be 5 collected from the regional fund under the current proposal we've got today.
But not from Hamilton ratepayers.
Okay, all right. That makes sense, thanks. Yep.
Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Have we got an answer to my question around the rates yet? Since he's up at the table.
So it's an interesting question. For each of the 3 years, an operating grant of this nature does affect our balancing the books. And if we have a look at page 17 of the report on our financial strategy measures, at the bottom of page 17, the table for how we calculate balancing the books has an item on it called Other Items Not Considered Normal Operating Expenses. And that was considered because as we were developing the budget, this item and potentially some other items could be considered to be so large and so extraordinary that it's not appropriate to include them in our balancing the books. So this would remove those expenses from that. So that would be a decision of council to do that, because at the moment in year 3 of the LTP, because of the offset of the other revenue that's referred to, as Councillor Rob pointed out, we've used that offset in the first couple of years in the debt, with the money coming in and the money going out, so it's not affecting the balancing the books in that way. But in year 3 we have a quite large loss on balancing the books as a result of that. In all of our sampling of rates, we have assumed in year 2 and 3 we don't balance the books. We balance in year 1.
So Stephen, sorry, can I be very clear, because you're not at all answering my question, so perhaps I wasn't clear with it. the 20 million that Mayor Andrew initially put forward is built into the budget.
Yes.
Which is 15.5% rates increase year 1, 3.8 for 2 and 3. He's now proposing an extra $5 million. My question was, what impact does that $5 million have in year 1, 2 and 3?
Can I pick up this up?
Okay.
Stephen?
Yep.
Okay, so firstly, you're right. It'll make it's gone into year 3, I think, Brett. So we'll have a larger balanced budget deficit in year 3. Right, so that's where that sits. When it comes to funding of this contribution, the fact that it's an operating expense, where we've agreed to fund it because ultimately it is a large intergenerational item of an asset nature, we've agreed to fund it from debt. Well, we haven't. We've suggested it's funded by debt. The Mayor suggested in his budget that we fund it from debt. So we will run a deficit according to this and fund that from debt as acknowledged. And why Stephen was referring you to page 17 was it's one of those one-off items that this council would have to vote on at the very end of this discussion before it makes a decision about rates. All those large items, whether or not they wish to fund it from rates or from debt. This is one of the ones we recommend that, given its nature is towards a bricks and mortar, even though we're not going to own the bricks and mortar, that it should be debt funded because it's going to be hopefully 60, 70, 80 years worth of investment for the community. So that's the argument behind that.
Okay, so my first question, I think you've answered. The extra $5 million is not going to go into year 1 because that would tip us way above 15.5% rates increase. It's going to year 3. So again, my question remains, what is the rates impact in year 3? Because it won't be 3.8.
No,
Yeah.
No, so can I just part
but
the question in bits?
Yeah, so that was where my questions were going.
So there's not...
But now you're saying that actually you're going to fund it via debt.
Yes, correct.
So then if you can do that while calling it an operating expense, why don't you just say it's funded from debt?
In
A, it says operating grant of 25 million. That should say...
So basically I've put in a section here under Mayor Andrews. If you scroll down a little bit to Councillor O'Leary's one, scroll down a little bit, approves debt funding as well. So we've tweaked it. We have secret promotion, that's where I didn't put it up. I'm going to come talk to you about it. So we've now specifically mentioned debt funding from that. So if you scroll back down to the top one, sorry, Becca. So what we're going to hear is council's funding will be met from a grant for VHT with council instructing the board of VHT that council wishes a $7 million grant is made to the theatre on council's behalf. Proceeds from the sale of Waikato Innovation Park Limited, and the remaining balance will be met from debt. We could still discuss the first two items. Councillor Pascoe had a question on those, but we made it very clear that our contribution towards the theatre will be from debt, which is council's choice. They can still choose to fund it from rates, which means that a rates increase will be required, not just for the $5 million increase, but for a $30 million increase, because a 15.5% has not been put forward to fund the theatre. The Mayor Andrews budget's been premised on the theatre being funded from debt, for the reasons I explained earlier.
18. So the impact on, with the Mayor's proposal, the impact to the ratepayer, no, because it's debt now.
Yes.
So the remaining debt balance would be 12 million if, 1, the shares are sold for 6 million, and 2, VA, Vibrant Hamilton Trust agree to give the grant of $7 million.
That's correct.
So the debt will go up by 12 million.
That's correct. And of course, you're right, in the long term, there's impact on the ratepayers through payment of interest and so forth over the next 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah, but because my follow-up question was, I'm concerned about doing this through the rates because it doesn't spread it intergenerational, and that's unfair. So
well, this came up actually from a question you asked in a briefing about 3 months ago. That's why we put it through debt.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to Rob now.
Yeah, thank you for that information. It does make it clear. I guess the immediate or the sort of questions I've got now is, has Vibrant Hamilton Trust got $7 million? My recollection of their last balance sheet that I saw, and I didn't look at the one that's in for tomorrow or Thursday, is that they had assets of about $6 million. So is there $7 million? And I guess that would presumably wind the trust up.
I might get the 6 and 7 around the wrong way, Rob.
I don't know. I'm guessing because I haven't got the balance sheet in front of me. But I thought their assets were about 5 or 6 million. But it doesn't matter. You can fix that up. Yep. I guess the question I'm asking is this effectively the wind up of the VHT? Because whatever you're taking out, whether it's 6 million or 7 million, my recollection is that is the capital fund.
Yes, if you recall, Council had this discussion at an earlier meeting earlier in the year about the next steps for Vibrant Hamilton Trust. You're correct. This would effectively distribute all of their remaining equity, and then following that, they would have to make a decision about what their future is, and a natural step would be to wind up.
Okay, all right. Did we approve that? Did we approve the wind up?
Vibrant Hamilton Trust, if I recollect, sent a letter to this council asking what their intentions were.
What our intentions
were towards the trust, and we signalled at that stage that we would come back with and set our intent. This is effectively setting our intent.
Right.
And we have a report coming on Thursday, is that right? From Vibrant Hamilton Trust?
That's on the annual report of Vibrant Hamilton Trust. We should go and check that number too, Councillor Rob.
They used to fund all the garden stuff, didn't they?
So this is quite new to me. I'm a little bit surprised that that's in there. But anyway, obviously it's sitting in the motion. The second one is Waikato Innovation Park. Now, my understanding of the transfer of the 80% of the ownership in Waikato Innovation Park from and I've forgotten the name of the trust, but there was a trust that owned 80%.
Catalyst.
Catalyst, thank you, yeah. The Catalyst Trust owned 80%, City Council owned 20%, we now own 100%. There were some certain conditions.
You're correct, Councillor Pascoe, the 80% from Catalyst.
Around how the capital fund could be used. Are we potentially breaching any of those conditions?
The advice we've received is that, well, firstly, you're correct. The 80% needed to be used for charitable purposes because Catalyst was a charitable trust. So any distribution they made, so the shares need to be held for charitable purposes. Yep. If those shares are dissolved, the proceeds from the shares need to be held for charitable purposes. Okay. The definition of charitable is the same definition in common law, so it's quite broad, and this would actually meet that intent. So this would be seen as a charitable.
So Momentum is a charitable trust?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Just through the Chief Executive, Councillor Pascoe, it's not actually the recipient, it's actually the activity that the money is going towards. So a theatre meets the definition of charitable purpose in terms of the type of activity. So it's not the fact that the money is going to Momentum, it's a grant towards a theatre, that is the key test. So in this case, a theatre meets the test of charitable purpose.
So my question is, right, there are a number of restrictions around what we could use those funds for.
Absolutely, and I think a report that I wrote for Council some time ago talked about the likes of pools, parks, facilities, playgrounds, theatres, etc. would meet those definitions.
So community purposes would generally fit?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Leo.
Yeah, Sean, I think from memory, when Momentum came to us, I think the gross cost of the theatre was around about 50 million, is that correct?
Yes, through the Chair, that is correct. That was their very back of the envelope estimate at the time, but through phase one of the project development with the external consultants, the new figure of 73 million was advanced and accepted.
So it just keeps going up and up and up?
Yeah, it's as they got a better handle on the figures.
Okay.
Done? Councillor Gary.
Just following off what Angela was saying, the funding, the grant funding, sorry, the what do we call it? The ownership funding, the $6.6 million a year. That is funded. That will hit our a profit and loss statement, which will mean we'll run a deficit, and we fund deficits by borrowing. So that's the mechanics of what's going through there, isn't it?
That's the 1.1 million you're referring to.
No, the 6.6 operating grant, which Stephen accurately portrayed as, I think in accounting terms they used to get called extraordinary item or something, but in terms of balancing our books, there's something, other items not considered normal operating revenue. So from a cash point of view, that $6.6 million times 3 is gone, but we're not going to include that in our balancing the books target mechanism.
Yes, that's the intent.
Yeah, okay. So in that, aren't we doing what we've been doing, what we've accused ourselves of doing?
No, because this isn't everyday revenue matching against everyday costs. This is an exceptional item that, as the Chief Executive said before, is replacing an item that would have once been capital for us and has a long-term benefit to us.
I guess the way I see it, we're giving $20 million of ratepayers' money to a theatre. We're going to get no revenue from that at all. So the debt will drop, our deficit will increase. All the things we're trying to measure through the balancing the book mechanism, using this as a way of measuring our performance, we're kind of, again, hiding.
End of the year it was.
I mean, we should just come out and say, we've blown our books, here it is, we're doing it because we think it's a good project, you know, but let's be open about it.
So I'm clear, the $1.1 million annual grant will stay in the balancing the books. It will become an everyday expense.
I understand that.
For which we have we will have to rate for that as the only source of income to fund that.
Yep.
But the one-off grant to allow for the building of the theatre, instead of spending that money ourselves to build a theatre and borrowing that money, we're going to borrow it and gift that money effectively to Momentum, and that's not an everyday cost.
Well, except that it is a textbook definition of an expense. It's money we're spending for which over that period of time we have nothing to show for it.
Accounting
because it's not an asset, is it? It's not an asset on our balance sheet.
Quite right.
Yeah.
However, there are other items in our balancing books calculation that are capital in nature or that we've adjusted for, even though, for example, there's an adjustment for the NZTA subsidy, which is accounting-wise revenue in nature. You know, accounting doesn't have the concept of capital revenue, and we're adjusting for it. So we're suggesting that this is an appropriate adjustment.
The balance of the balance of the books measure, I thought, was intended to help councillors and the community at large identify how council's going in terms of one of the big issues at the time and now still is our debt, and to what extent council through its day-to-day operations is accumulating debt or paying down debt, because there's only two ways we can pay down our debt. One is by operating surpluses, and the other is by selling assets. There's nothing else we can do. This, by not including this in our balancing the books, are we pulling a Swifty over the community?
So I don't think the balancing the books is so much about debt as about ensuring that our annual income meets our annual expenses for the everyday running of the city.
Only because a surplus allows us to pay down debt, though, Stephen.
If we're running at deficits, then we have to borrow for everyday costs, and there are not many circumstances where I would advise you that was prudent.
Yeah.
This is an exceptional one-off cost that you've got two options. You can partner with a third party, and the way the sector's going, we're going to be partnering with third parties more often and not building assets ourselves. And so we're just, for technical accounting reasons, we're paying out $30 million, and you and I understand that's got to be in the P&L, but to the layperson, they're getting an asset. And so I'm suggesting we adjust it out.
Yeah, okay, but all right. Well, but I'm suggesting we need to be clear to our community that the impact of this is that we didn't balance our books these 3 years by not insignificant amount because of the decision we made. And and the community will argue and debate about the value of the theatre versus the value of that. But I just think we are being less than transparent.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Councillor Mallett. This is by an active decision of council.
Yep.
You've got two choices. If you make a decision to go forward to the fund the theatre, you've got $30 million you can fund from debt, or this council could rightly say, we want to fund our contribution to the theatre by a targeted rate over 40 years, or something to that effect. We're not recommending that. Well, this is not recommended in this.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of all this process, council will make a decision how it wants to set its balanced budget measure. And it may well be that we just let this drop through the bottom line as a deficit, and we acknowledge that's our contribution.
Yep.
I think you hit it. It's about, and I absolutely agree with you, it's about transparency.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because we could, and Angela was asking this about the 15%, you know, we could actually for these 3 years, heaven help us if we do this, fund this through the rates. But, we'd have 3 years of 25% rate increase, well, I don't know what the figure is, but it's going to be more than 15.5%, and we would fund it, and it would not affect our debt. It would affect every ratepayer's debt, but it wouldn't affect our debt.
Yep,
but we may be deciding to fund it not through rates, but through debt, through running an operating deficit, the consequence of which is an increase in our debt. So let's be open about it.
Yeah, and I think we're arguing a point where everyone's agreeing that it's the outcome. So, yes, I agree with you, Councillor Mallett.
That's all I wanted.
Councillor Dove.
Look, I just want to follow through a bit more on the funding, the final 10 million of our funding. As far as the funding from the council, the 5 million from the other councils goes, is that being collected by is that proposed to be collected by the other councils and paid direct from them, or through the regional council?
Councillor.
Sean. Look, at this stage, the conversation is suggesting through the regional council.
Okay.
But if I could just stress that we are still in conversation.
Yeah, I know that, and we'll have to put a submission into their LTP and all sorts of consequential stuff that happens, as you say, at the same time, so we can't do that, but I'm trying to check where we're at the moment. The extra 5 million for us today, over the 20 million that was there last week, that's being talked about being collected from our ratepayers directly, or at least the debt funded by our ratepayers directly.
Correct.
Why is that not being also collected by the regional council through just the same way as it's being proposed for the 3 neighbouring councils?
Well, I think that's been part of the discussions we've been having, in a suggestion that perhaps Hamilton should rate its ratepayers directly for the full amount, as opposed to the regional council being used for that part of it. So this is part of our conversation that we're having.
I don't understand why it's being done differently for the surrounding councils, but from us. So I don't. I'm asking someone what the rationale for that is. I mean, when the velodrome was collected, that was the Hamilton share was collected by the regional council for paying to the trust.
That's correct. Yeah. Look, I think it's just. I'm just checking with Blair. It's part of the conversation we're having at the moment, and that's certainly the proposal that they've put to us at this stage.
Who's they?
The councils that we're talking to.
Yeah, but no, what about it's the regional council?
Yeah, and that includes the regional council. So it's a matter of how they want to try and approach the rating, but how they handle the rating for it.
Well, I want to know. I don't have a clear idea where that's come from, because last week we were proposing there be a 10 million regional rate. Regional significant fund, if that's what whatever it's called. That's what the proposal was to the mayoral forum and the regional council. This week, it's removed Hamilton's 5 million. So I'm trying to find out, asking someone, how has that changed?
Look, all I can say is it's the nature of how the conversations that we have had. Now, I'm happy, Mayor Andrew, to talk to you in a bit more detail, but I'm really hesitant to do that in an open forum like this, because I don't want to sort of breach the conversation, and they are just conversations we're having with other parties right now in an open forum.
I can appreciate that, Mr. Chair, but Mr. Mayor, I should say, but I'm loath to vote myself on sticking an extra 5 million on the ratepayers when there's opportunity that's actually being proposed to be used by our neighbouring councils for it to be collected via the regional council, regional significant facilities fund, or whatever it's called.
The feedback I've had is that the regional council's not comfortable doing that for Hamilton, but they'll do it for our neighbours.
Well, then I want a conversation on that, because that element, personally, I couldn't care less whether the regional council's comfortable or not. What's the right thing to do? And I don't understand why it's the right thing for some councils, but not us.
I understand there was some discussion about whether or not it was a regional or a sub-regional asset, and it was you probably argue, Councillor Dave, that might be a philosophical debate that this is seen as a sub-regional asset, and the initial position was they would fund it regionally if it was a true regional asset. They said that's not the case. Now they're looking at the other opportunities to make some contribution to it and be a vehicle to collect rates from the other councils. It may still well be that the $5 million contribution doesn't come from the regional council. It may well come from the 3 councils that the Mayor mentioned earlier as well. So it's a step down, and that's probably part of the conversation that's happened, has been a step down from that. Is it a regional asset? Is it a sub-regional asset? And this is where it's landed. I mean, the ideal situation...
But at the moment, the sub-regional asset is the suggestion, as Sean has said, is that Waikato District, Waipa and Matamata Piako, their share is collected by the regional council from their ratepayers, is it not?
Councillor Dave, I can see exactly where you're going, and I've just asked the Chief Executive to amend the motion to cover that off, and so that if we can get to a stage where we can put it through a targeted rate, it'll come back down to 20. So I understand where you're going, and negotiations are still live, and so I think we could actually include that in the resolution, if that's helpful to you.
That is helpful, because I believe, I mean, the number of things will change during the LTP discussions and submissions, and I think we should be proposing what the council wants to have happen. Yeah. There may be changes.
You're right on track, and I can see exactly where you're going, and I agree with, I would like to see the same outcome.
Thank you.
Through the Chair, if I can just possibly offer some further comment to Sean's feedback and Councillor Mack, to your question. So this was a topic of conversation at the Mayoral Forum I've just come from this morning. It's fair to say this is still, there's a lot of conversation to be had. And I think the timing of this particular item with the Regional Council's long-term plan and the other council's long-term plan is very delicate. And so I think positively, Councillor Dave, most of this will sort of play out over the next 2 months, and we can find our way of submitting to each council's relative LTPs, including the regional councils.
So in terms of the sub-regional versus regional argument, yep. Can you confirm that the velodrome's funds were collected from across the region?
Yes, so the velodrome was a regional asset. Yeah. And so the conversation that was had...
So why is the difference? I mean, I'm just wondering whether many people cycle up from Taupo or down from Coromandel Township.
So the conversation that occurred this morning with the mayors was that whilst the primary beneficiaries of the theatre are quite clearly the sub-region, some of the mayors from outside the sub-region said, actually, we see this as a regional facility, and so they've asked Momentum to do a bit more work to look at what that would look like from a regional perspective. Admittedly, the majority of any funding will come from the core 4 councils, Hamilton being the biggest, Matamata, Waipa and Waikato would be a smaller portion. And of course, their councils have yet to discuss this. Those councils outside of that area, which currently, if you look at the Founders Theatre type model, those other areas don't use Founders significantly, although the conversation today was that this theatre is different to Founders. It's going to offer a different level of service. It's going to bring attractions to the Waikato that weren't otherwise currently coming to the Waikato. And so therefore it should be seen as a regional facility, and the funding formula should try and at least pick up a small contribution from those areas outside the 4 councils.
And that was our proposition to the Mayoral Forum, was it not? The closest ones paid a higher rate in the dollar.
Yes, some sort of a tiered approach is what was just talked about this morning. Clearly more conversations required, Dave, and obviously the Regional Council, if the proposal is for them to put an amount in their long-term plan, there will be conversations post-Christmas when they have their long-term plan meetings in January and early February. So so it's very much a dynamic discussion at the moment.
So the Mayor's suggestion just before of separating that $5 million Hamilton contribution, extra Hamilton contribution out, and putting that in as a potential separately collected rate, whether it's via the regional council or us as the backstop, would be consistent with what you're talking
Yes,
about?
because the conversation was that Momentum is seeking up to $10 million from the region, of which, if you looked at the spread of beneficiaries, half of that $10 million was allocated directly to Hamilton. So the Mayor's suggestion of that 5 being either a targeted rate or through regional council would pick up that same sentiment. I think that the conversation was the regional council didn't want to be seen to be charging our ratepayers for a portion, and Hamilton also charging our ratepayers for our portion. Far more efficient to Hamilton to just administer its entire portion at once. So certainly that conversation can continue, and I think the change wording would pick that sentiment up.
Yeah. Okay. Can we see that change wording? It's as though it was there before, I think.
Is that what your expectations were, Councillor McPherson?
I was more going on what the Mayor suggested. Not quite. It would be collect 10 million from the region, understanding that 50% would be from Hamilton ratepayers.
Okay, so you just want to say 10 million from the region, full stop?
It's probably the best thing. How it's done is obviously still up in the air.
So just get rid of the parentheses. Just put full stop there, Becca. Just put full stop there, please.
Is it correct to say that 10 million from the region would be roughly half of it comes from us anyway? Is that right?
We'd have to calculate that, yeah.
But roughly, is that about what happens?
Well, I think, because it's not exactly population proportion. Has it been agreed that 50% is the right proportion somewhere? I don't know.
But that's the outcome of that anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Well, if that's what we decide, 50-50.
Is that D going to also...
No, not yet. We're still on Dave.
So, we're just trying to get clarification of the wording there, Paula. I think Gary is right to one extent. You have to, if it's a possibility that it's going to end up on our rates book, we have to give the public some expectation that one way or another they're going to be paying half. It's just whose rates bill it's on, perhaps. And that might be a separate or a subset of it. Okay. I fully expect that the CEO will be able to do the wording that'll match.
I thought I had, Councillor Dave.
Okay, Councillor Dave, are we okay if we go on and come back to you?
Yes, please. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Paula.
So I've just got a couple of questions about, and I must confess to feeling a tiny bit frustrated because I was chairperson through the development of that fund and through regional funding initiatives before. And I just want to make one correction, if I might, and that is that while all the councils were targeted with a targeted rate for the velodrome, there were a couple of councillors didn't put any in through that targeted rate. It was distance-based, and there were a couple that were right out, including Coromandel and Taupo, for example. So just a correction in that respect. And I have to say that at that time, the Regional Economic Development Fund did not exist at all. So there were other mechanisms, other agreements between councils to get there. So I'll just make that point for clarification. But the question I have, and I suppose it's a leading question and I do know the answer to that, the criteria about the Regional Economic Development Fund, it's true that, isn't it, that Regional Council have noted that this project isn't a very good fit for the criteria of that fund, and they aren't actually proposing to get it from that fund, but to raise it in some other way.
That is correct.
Thank you, because just so councillors do understand, if you're interested, that fund is a real turn up the dial on economic development fund. It's not to do with shared facilities, but the Regional Council has been talking about shared facilities, hoping to do better, in fact, from things like the velodrome, and to use more of the model of the surf lifesaving, where people can agree to fund through the Regional Council regional assets and services. But you've got to understand that that Regional Economic Development Fund is not what we're talking about here. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just in support of what Paula was talking about, just for the regional council to participate in the funding model here, importantly, they're looking for demonstration of how this facility has a regional benefit, albeit, as many speakers have talked about, it's primarily in a sub-region where the facility provides predominant beneficiaries. We need to find the rationale for the benefit across the entire Waikato region. So that's going to be a key part of how the regional council may be able to participate in the funding model for this. And that's in line with the regional funding facilities framework that's been adopted in recent times.
Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thank you. Look, just a couple of quick ones. Could we perhaps have some sort of policy around? I mean, you know, we did the $4 million for the Rototuna. This is obviously a substantial grant. We potentially might look at a grant to the university. Of course, all of those things have a different and potentially adverse effect on our revenue statement in the year that we make the grant. So, and I'm just going back on Gary's sort of questions. If we could have some sort of clarity around the differences in those, I think as we move forward, we will be doing a lot more of these joint ventures where we don't own the assets as we previously have, and having a little bit of clarity around how we might treat that grant in the year that it's made or the years that it's made would be useful in terms of working around our new policy of balancing the books and how we set our rates, because quite clearly, you know, I think councillors need to know that the decision that they're making is either being funded out of rates, if it's a revenue expense, or whether we expect to have a deficit that year because it's been funded out of debt. So just a thought in terms of where we go from there. The other thing is, just on D, Mayor Andrew, I just like the word, instead of council instructs, that perhaps council requests. The word instruct is a bit harsher, I think, in terms of the fact that we are going cap in hand to the regional council. We're wanting them to do things our way.
It was harsh on me and also written by me.
Yeah, okay, but if I mean, it's over to you, Mayor Andrew, if you're happy with that. I think request is just a wee bit softer.
I do appreciate manners. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Councillor Ange, have you got a seconder for your...
No, I'll withdraw. I'm really comfortable where we've all gotten to, and thank you for including my request in there around the referring to the regional rate. Thank you.
Oh, a question, Angela. The other one refers to the grant from the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, which I'm not comfortable with. I would have seconded your...
Yeah, no, I actually am very comfortable. We have made that decision through council, so I'm quite comfortable with that. Thank you.
Paula, you can put an amendment up if you feel you want to.
Has been had, so I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so there's no... Councillor Ange. No.
For the record, I am disappointed that the terms of the agreement have seemed to, the goalposts have seemed to have moved, because that was an agreement between us and Momentum that we approach central government, and I think we've lost an opportunity there. And I raise a caution that I've raised again this term around the wording and the consequences that flow on from not getting our resolutions exactly right, because interpretations do have consequences. I do support the Vibrant Hamilton Trust payment going through. I did move, and I believe Councillor Taylor seconded that those funds be used for a significant strategic asset for the city, and we had the river, the gardens and the theatre on there, so I'm really pleased that that's in there and happy to support it. Thank you.
2016. Councillor James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's quite unfortunate. Since this plan for the Waikato Regional Theatre came in, we've had other things that have come in as well, like the River Plan extension, the Garden Place revamp. You know, we came into this 10-year plan here with a 15.5% rates increase. It's turned into a rage. Yeah, rates increase, and we've come in here to try and get that down a bit. Unfortunately, I can't see that happening. Now, look, we've got a opportunity here to save 25 to 30 million to the ratepayer of Hamilton. Whatever way we go around it, the ratepayer of Hamilton are going to have to pay for this and through the regional rates as well, maybe half of it. So look, that's my concern, is that our ratepayers are going to be hit twice. We've got places like Clauden's that's doing quite well at the moment, the Gallagher Performing Arts, and the other smaller places like Riverlea and the Meteor. I'm looking at the ratepayer here, and I want to save us a bit of money, so I can't vote for the motion, unfortunately, today.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, doing nothing about a theatre in Hamilton is not an option at this time. We don't have one. So we do need to put this proposal forward for public consideration, so I will support it. Not that I'm comfortable with every last little bit of that motion, but that's democracy. I will say of the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, using a portion of that money towards this project is bang on, as Councillor O'Leary has suggested. We should be using that kind of money for these type of projects. What I am uncomfortable with is that it's not really sound process, in my view, to bleed something dry and then talk about winding it up. You would normally decide that it should be wound up and distribute the assets. So I'm not quite comfortable with that. I'll just mention it. I'm also a little bit uncomfortable about how far behind we are with advancing the conversations with the neighbouring councils. Now, look, I have first-hand experience of exactly how difficult it is to get neighbouring councils on board, and there is history there. There is history in which some councils will feel that Hamilton didn't contribute enough to the velodrome, or they didn't contribute to Karapiro, which is a regional facility as well. But moving on more productively, I do think we need to have a conversation ongoing through the mayoral forum around funding regional assets, and that regional assets facility strategy was that not the economic fund, but that one is absolutely the right mechanism. Ideally, we'd have everyone singing from the same song sheet. We'd have Waikato District, Waipa District, Matamata Piako District Council putting a note in their proposed plans, and this is what I would like to see, them putting some note in their proposed plans that they support this, and then we're all pulling together.
Seconded.
Thank you. So I'm nearly finished. And then we're all pulling together. We need to have those councils talking to their communities about what their expectations are in terms of support, and so we need to do some urgent work on that. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, support the motion. This, again, as we evolve the regional funding model, this will be an asset test, and acknowledging even under the regional council funding model, as Councillor Casson says, a chunk comes from Hamilton itself. But I kind of see the day where we'll be running the ads in our own city news, which I personally want to keep, and we really look at what Hamilton regional and city ratepayers contribute to the region as a whole, and what for our regional rate do we get back in terms of the spend within the city. I'm not saying that what the regional council does for the region is not really valid, and these things have to be done, and I agree that yes, the regional rate will evolve in terms of, what contribution do we make to the Hamilton City Beach, which is at Raglan with the Surf Life Saving Club, will involve the Karapiro, Mangatautri, etc., but it'll also involve Claudelands and the Hamilton Gardens and our swimming pool infrastructure, and we know ad infinitum. What I like about this motion is it just maybe means that the multimillionaires of Tamahiri get to pay something. And the ordinary working people of Frankton Dinsdale have to pay all the time, but our multimillionaire friends, and I love my multimillionaire friends in Tamahiri, but they get to pay as well. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
I was just looking at Sean Hickey when Martin talked about the multi-million-dollar friends from Tamaheri.
I thought he's one of the Franklin guys.
No. Look, I've got some sympathy with Councillor O'Leary regarding that central government funding. That is a bit of a disappointment, but I think there's been some negotiations about some potential money in the opposite direction as well to offset that, perhaps. I know that the Trust at one point had their eyes on the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, but we've snaffled that aspect. I say to James maybe, look, there were huge numbers of submissions on the Founders Theatre replacement to this council, to the previous version of this council, and that council made an undertaking not to ignore them, to set aside $30 million towards the overall cost. Now, the overall costs have increased, but our $30 million share hasn't. In fact, it's gone down because our mayor and some of the senior managers have been doing some work through the mayoral forum to try and reduce that amount, and all power to their hands, because it is going to be definitely a regional facility, and we should not be funding the whole lot. Martin's made some good points about regional funding for activities and facilities in Hamilton, and I don't think it's been equitable, but I know some of the people outside Hamilton think it's been inequitable in the opposite direction. I think they're wrong, but we need to do some more work in that area. I think at the end of the day, we should be trying to reduce the amount to ratepayers as much as possible while delivering what the last council undertook to do.
Okay, that's three consecutive speakers for. Is there anyone against? Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I'm nervous about speaking against it because I am supportive of the fact that we are sinking 30 million in whatever form, and I'm grateful to the Mayor for chasing this deal. I think you're doing well in that respect. The bit that I don't think is quite right yet is the annual operating grant of 1.1 million. Now, we listened to the ratepayers, to use James's words last week, listen to the ratepayers, and you know, it's largely accepted that we're going to put $30 million into this this project that's going to be run and generated by the very able people of Momentum. But not much has been spoken about this $1.1 million a year for the 20 years following year 3, which is a $22 million 20-year commitment. And I just don't think that's quite right yet. I was a little bit disappointed to hear that we can't, in the same vein as our 30 million, approach the other councils and get them to help out with that. And I just don't think it's right yet. I am supportive of the theatre. Okay, so please no one run to your Facebook pages and say Bunting didn't vote for the theatre, because I do. I think it's great, but I just don't think we've got it right for public consultation yet, and that is the part C. Because the whole exercise of this debate is, what do we put into the budget to take out to the community to have a chew on? I don't think we've quite got that $1.1 million per year for the next 20 years after year 3 right, because I don't think people saw that coming. I don't think people saw that ongoing commitment, and that is off our rates. That is off our rates for those years. So I will be voting against it in its current form. I will do what I can to support this initiative, because I think in principle it's right, but I just think we haven't got that bit quite right yet, so we'll vote against it.
Councillor Garrow, are you speaking against?
The regional funding model we're all pushing is actually just a fraud. The people outside our region will get naff all out of this. The only thing they'll get out of it is a theatre that's close. They won't have to go to Auckland, but they'll get no economic spin-off from it. Lots and huge parts of this, our own community will get no economic spin-off from it. Sure, there'll be a lovely theatre there, and there'll be great. So that is the benefit. There's naff all beyond that. Naff is an economic term that a lot of people use. And secondly, I am concerned, and I don't know to what extent the discussion we had, or the question I was asking about this being what I believe to be, and I'm not the world's greatest accountant, but that what I believe to be a more clear and honest disclosure of the impact of this thing is that I believe that we should be showing quite clearly, because we have no money. Everything we do has to get borrowed from debt or rates. I think we really need to include this in our balancing the books calculation, such that the 6.6 for the next 3 years is shown as a very clear expense which we have to fund through debt. And of course, at the end of the day, there is only one way, or there are two ways, that we can pay back our debt. One is paying off, selling fixed assets. The other way is by increasing rates. So somewhere along the line, that $6.6 million that we're calling, the one we called what do we call it, a ownership grant or something like that, or the operating thing, is actually simply debt funded, which is going to, at the end of the day, be ratepayer funded, because we'll have to either eliminate expenses or increase our rates. That's the only way we do it. And it seems to me this council does not have the stomach to reduce expenses, so it's going to come from rates. Somewhere along the line, it's going to come from rates. Thank you.
We'll go to the board to vote.
The motion is carried 9-4-3 against.
Okay, we'll now go to Rotorua Town Centre. No, we'll stop at, we start at 12:30, so we'll stop at 2:30. We're on Rotorua Town Centre's page 10, and Leanne. 286. Thank you, Lance. We'll take the report as read. Is there anything you want to add?
Oh, just following on from Councillor Robb's resolution the other day around the playgrounds, shifting $2 million from the proposed $20 million in here into the playgrounds program, which would reduce in the mayoral recommendations the 20 million to funding of 18 million over those years 1, 2 and 3. The rest of it will take as read. Happy to answer any questions. Helen's here too. Obviously she did that presentation to a briefing a wee while ago about the town centre, and happy to answer any questions.
Any amendments on this one, members? Okay. Councillor.
After the discussion, I might come up.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. Up until we go to the vote. Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Just a couple of very straightforward questions. The 20 million over, so the 20 million over 1, 2 and 3 would be uncomfortable to fund given that reduction in the, or you?
I think it's 18 million. So cross out the first line.
Oh.
And put 18 instead of 20.
And how much? Yes, sorry, I didn't see that. I'm looking at my little paperwork here, but so.
Sorry, Paul, it's 18.5 million, is that?
I don't know. I was just going to ask that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, how much have we got left in the community facilities if we go ahead with Rotorua Town Centre? Not that I'm opposed to it, but.
Well, can I
just clarify? There's 18 million capex and there's 500,000 for opex for the business planning and all the costings and that sort of thing, the project planning.
And so, how much does it leave us in the community sense to work with for the rest of the projects?
I'd have to get the guys to look at the.
Will Stephen be able to tell us that? Oh. Can you ask that and come back while I ask my other question?
Councillor Paula, nothing has changed from the sheet that we handed out this morning.
Yeah.
So so if you approve the 18 million for the Rotorua Town
we still
Centre,
have that 6.
still at 6.9.
So 6.9 to do any other stuff. Okay, just
Correct.
wanted to be sure. And in terms of the 20 million, which excludes the Learn to Swim facility, because that's going to be a negotiation with the provider, excluding that then, excluding the pool, will we be able to do the car park, the commercial hub, the community square, the library and community meeting space for that $20 million over the 3 years? Can we do it?
We'll do it for the 18 million. Yes.
Oh, sorry, all right, 18 million. So we can do a really good job of those various aspects, because that's quite a lot. There's a library, community meeting space, car parks and public square. We can do it for the 18 million.
Yeah, it'll be subject to full design and a business case coming back to council.
Brilliant.
And obviously there's a library in there, there's a community meeting rooms. Town Square, the Town Square will be subject to design. We might have to put some more softer elements in there, seeing we've taken $2 million out, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And realising there's a lot of green space through the area, and there's a swale as well, and trying to get ecological corridors. As you mentioned, there's a couple of car parks as well, which we have to meet resource consent requirements. So it ties in. And yes, you're right. The proposal is that there's a footprint where the planned aquatic centre was, that we would work in negotiation with a private partner for them to construct something and operate a facility on that footprint.
So on that, would there be any costs to us if a private partner came in and wanted to build on that land, or how would that work? Would there be any expectation of council? Will we be up for any more car parks or anything that we haven't expected?
Car parks, no, but the devil will be in a negotiation around what's the lease arrangements for a piece. Pending on council's decision, obviously through the LTP. I suspect there will be others as well. They see.
So you have a level of confidence that you can get a
Yes.
private partnership to work. That's good. And so with the library community meeting space again, you'd had a recent field trip to Te Awamutu, and you saw their combined centre. That's the sort of scale and nature of the proposal you might get out at Rototuna?
That's correct. We might just throw the photos up, ladies, if we can, from governance, if that's possible.
We're just trying to locate the USB that Helen gave us, sorry.
Okay, well, that's fine. So while you find the photos, I've finished my questions. Thank you, Mayor Andrew.
Councillor Ange.
Thank you. One question. The 2.4 million of DCs that we originally took for the town centre, is there an obligation to pay any interest while we've held that fund?
Sorry, interest to...
And well, is there an obligation? I mean, the 2.4 million of DCs that we've taken and held on to for some years, I'm assuming that's sat somewhere that's accumulated some interest?
I'd have to ask one of the financial boffins for how we handle DCs. Blair might... Blair had a bit to do with Rototuna to start with.
Yeah, look, sorry, Angela, I'm not sure what the 2.4 pertains to, but I know we've answered this question extensively in the past around DCs taken in regard to certain Rototuna community
It's in
projects.
the report. It says we've taken 2.4 million in DCs some years back.
Yes, we have. I need to read that section of the report. Sorry, I haven't read that part. I know this topic has been raised in the past around historical projects, and certainly at the time that the team provided evidence as to corresponding expenditure that money could be allocated against. So I just need to have a read of that section.
So I missed a question, Councillor Angela, just updating the amendment. What was the question? Sorry.
My question is, and I can frame it generally, my question is when we take DCs from a developer and we, for whatever reason, as the example is for the town centre, hang on to those DCs for some time before we spend them, that would, I'm assuming, accumulate some interest because we can't use it for anything else.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So then, are we obligated to spend 2.4 million plus the interest back into that infrastructure?
There will be a update to that $2.4 million number, so we need to check what that is. So we have collected 2.4 million, and it will be earning effectively interest as a consequence.
Okay, so then we invest whatever the quantum is plus interest back into the infrastructure.
Yep.
Okay, so I'd be interested actually, because it's been some years since we've collected the DCs, I'd be interested in actually what that figure is and how we can follow that transparently through.
Yep, ultimately it makes no difference the way numbers roll out, because the way the model's built assumes that the amount of debt we're going to create, or the debt capacity we use, will be net of the interest that's been earned as well. So it won't change your debt number.
No.
But I'll find that information
And
out
I
for you.
don't need it through the LTP. Offline is fine. Thank you.
Cool.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. We talked about a private partner, but why are we doing this at all? Wouldn't we be better off selling the whole concept to the private sector and say, you build a shopping centre, community hub, library, we'll lease the building off you, and they take all the risk, they take all the profits from leasing out the pub and the cafes and the sushi shop and the gym and all those things that are there. I just don't understand why this is even a Hamilton City Council project. I can understand why we might, my views on libraries are well known, but I can understand why we would want to have some control over possibly the library, just lease a building. And, this concept of a meeting hall, I mean, that's just a pub, isn't it? Where you go and have a... Well, I mean, honestly, there are pubs that have a pub and they have a meeting room where you can have a function room and that sort of stuff. That's the community hub for 21sts and the footy club or something wants to have a meeting down there. I just, the whole concept of this being a publicly funded thing just doesn't quite fit with me. We're not good at doing these things anyway. I don't know why we would be imposing the risk and the cost of this on the ratepayer.
Sorry, what was the question?
Okay, so why are we doing it? Why isn't this just like what happened out at Rototuna, what happened at Chartwell, Linden Court, all of these places?
Most of those places you talk about don't have any community facilities. Some do. Chartwell, the library's not in the shopping precinct. This is part of a structure plan, part of a comprehensive development plan that council's committed to over the years.
So what was the thing you said? Most of these things don't have a what? Community facility?
They don't have community facilities.
So where anywhere is there a community facility? What are you talking about?
Like a library. So Chartwell,
okay, so the library.
So Chartwell, we own the library, which is outside the shopping centre.
Do we own the building the library's in, do we?
Oh, okay. We own all our library buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we? What about the Hillcrest one? Oh, do we own it?
Yeah. Yeah, and
that's right. We own
the
shops
next door.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's part of effect to the structure plan, to our comprehensive development plan. Yes, your option is a possibility around, you could lease space for a library. Generally that's quite expensive, but getting the developer to develop the town square, we have worked through a comprehensive development program plan, and essentially council through planning has committed to that sort of facility over time, as we have with buying land for parks and the aquatic centre across the road. So there's been a commitment from council to provide community facilities, especially in the area where the commercial sector wouldn't provide those. But the commercial sector could provide a library building that we rent. It hasn't been our modus operandi, and there's a way of looking at this proposal is doing it the other way as well. Can we combine with a private developer? And obviously Kirkdale Investments and others will be getting away the shopping centre pretty soon. But this is our commitment to the community facilities within that actual, which is shown on page 289 of the report, and that we had at the briefing the other week.
So, I mean, there's retail and all sorts of things, and it just strikes me, and I don't mean any offence when I say this, it's something that we would be useless at doing, because we're not in that all the time. We're not aware of what tenancies are required. I mean, there's not a heck of a lot. I mean, unless I can't see something, there's no tennis courts here. There's no there's no rugby fields or anything like that. It's not that kind of a thing. It is, the way I look at it, it is exactly the same as a smaller version of the base. Yeah, well, and that's it's a big scale down from the base, but it's Chartwell Square, and in there's a whole lot of things that the community loves, like there's supermarkets and there's cafes and there's the pubs and there's retail and there's parking and there happens to be a library.
Gary, question please.
But this is really fun. Well, my question is why aren't we? I mean, this is really fundamental.
You've had 5
why
minutes
are
to
we
build
doing
the case.
it,
Now
not
ask
the
the
public
question,
sector?
please.
Why is the private sector not doing it? And why have we considered that?
The private sector is developing all those commercial aspects of the precinct that's on the plan. We would only be doing the ones which are the ones at the top of the plan, which are in the pinky purple colour, which is the library, the town square and the aquatic facility.
The town square thing, just expand on that for me.
It's basically similar to Garden Place or Civic Square, a modern area that gets the linkage between...
They've been absolute winners, haven't they?
I think this is a bit different in a suburban
I hope
centre.
so.
It's been designed to interlink the community facilities, so those are integral to that working. Yeah.
So basically, it's a place where you park your car and go. Or you either go to the aquatic centre or you go to the library. Is that what the public square is?
Well, there's also shops and retail and restaurants and a whole bunch of other stuff
but
next to it as well.
That's the private sector.
Yeah, but they'll be developing that there and then linking into the square next to it, similar to VOTR.
So what do we bring to it? What do we do? So basically, there's the aquatic centre and the library, and that bit in the middle there.
And the town square, which will have amenity value, will be places for people to sit. Those sorts of things. So it's basically that'll be the hub.
What are we projecting for this? How much is it going to cost?
18 million.
Down from 20 million. Okay, and there's a community. Dave just pointed out there's a community building. What's that mean?
So there's a library, and we've shown you an example.
But that's miles away from the community building.
Chaumutu Library.
Yeah, no, sorry. So there's a piece of land. Is that the piece of land further down by the school that you're pointing to, by the Christian school? Dave?
So on page 189, it's on the right-hand side of the...
Yeah, so that is zoned community, so it's not land that we would own or develop, but it would be...
Is that part of what we're calling the Rototuna Town Centre?
That's right. It's zoned community. Someone may want to build an early childhood centre or something there. That's not council's land.
So our 18 million does not include that piece of land for development.
Oh, okay, all right. All right. Okay, so it's $18 million for... Yeah, okay, I can't see the community are going to get value for $18 million.
Now, Gary, questions, please.
Yeah, okay, no, that's right. Okay, so I'm just trying to explore that the private sector should take it, that we should...
Gary, questions.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Councillor Pascoe, please.
Yeah,
that's right.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I take it from the discussion with Councillor Mallett that our 18 million includes the cost of the library building, setting up the library, the town centre, and building that, constructing that, and the car parks.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So the car parks, we're not providing all the car parks for the sushi shops and the gyms and all of the other retail businesses that Councillor Mallett alluded to?
No, so there's a number of car parks across the town centre, so this factors in the community facility component of it. Yep. So we're not responsible for anything to do with the supermarket. Yep. There is a shared component, a shared element there, and I've kind of factored it into the high level costing that we will be negotiating with the developers around some of that.
So that means some of our residents using the library could park in the supermarket car park.
They could.
And not get their cars clamped or something if they wandered off to the library.
Yep. The on-street parking. Conversely, people using the town centre could use the library and the aquatic facility car park. So,
yep. Okay.
And there's also, just to go beyond that, there's also facilities for buses.
Yeah, I saw that.
So
that's on the plan there,
design
isn't it?
around that.
Yep.
And if you recall the presentation Helen did in the briefing, yep. And also, which I think Councillor Dave brought up, was just the connectivity with people using bikes, scooters, skateboards, or okay. Like the kids at Rototuna High School. I think 70% are actually using alternative forms of transport. Okay. So that's going to link with the park, so that there's cycle and other modes of travel routes through the park as well, which leads up to the school.
Yeah, okay. A PPP seems quite attractive to me in the sense that we don't end up funding the capital cost, but enter into a long-term lease agreement with whoever develops the
Question, Councillor Rob, please.
site. Yep, I'm coming to that. Have you done that business case exercise to compare $18 million invested versus what impact a PPP in terms of an annual lease payment would have on all of those the town centre, the car park and the library?
The answer is no. That's what the 500,000 is in the operating expenses there.
So we're going to do that. So we're going to do that. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
We'll be exploring different options around that.
Yep, okay. No, that's good. And just coming back to Councillor Angela's, I read paragraph 38 that we had a requirement to refund the 2.4 million. Have I misread that, or is it only if we don't go ahead with this project that we are bound to repay the $2.5 million?
Just if we don't go ahead with the project.
So there's no penalty on us.
Can I correct that?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's slightly true. So as long as we still have... It's slightly true, or almost the complete story. There's a little bit to finish the complete story. Sorry, Helen, didn't mean to insult you. Basically, as long as we've got a funding provision in our 10-year plan at some point for... relating to the pool and the library at Rototuna, we don't have to repay the money. So as long as council's got an intention at some point, if council passes a resolution that they no longer want to hold that placeholder open, then effectively we've got to step back. So it's based around the funding.
Would a PPP, if we decided on a PPP, and I see that's suggested for the aqua, as a possibility for the aquatic centre. Does that also, the fact that we might not do the development in terms of, funding it out of our debt, but entering into a long-term lease, does a PPP effectively mean that we haven't undertaken the development?
If we don't, so basically development contributions about collection for the capital outlay. So if we don't have a capital outlay, we can't collect collect DCs, and if we don't do it, we're going to have to repay the DCs back. Okay. So we need to be careful how we structure this. But when you take the DCs under the old legislation, it's reasonably broad in terms of use for amenity purposes anyway. So we don't have to spend it. We can spend it all on a pool or all on a library or a mix of both. So we're safe in that respect.
But I'm assuming here, if we went with a PPP, we wouldn't actually own the facility.
That's correct, and therefore would not be able to use development contributions for it.
Okay, so we're at risk if we did something like that of having to pay it back.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, I'm getting a little confused about the car parks, whether we're building any of the off-street ones, any of them ourselves, or whether they're part of the supermarket only, or some.
No, we're building some.
Okay.
Yep.
So why are we building off-street car parks, and I'm separating that from on-street, when the benefit of them is going to be for the shop owners and shop operators, the retail operators, and maybe residents above them?
So one of them's related to the library, and then the other one's related over by where the aquatic centre is located, over there. So there's parking for the people using the aquatic centre. Some of that will probably spill over onto the use of the fields, but there is also on-street parking planned for one side of the fields as well. Helen might be able to elaborate a bit more.
Just thinking about, maybe she can include this, but thinking about the other community libraries, I don't recall any of them where we've had significant, if any, extra provision of off-street car parking supplied. I mean, the Hillcrest shops, for instance, just have the bit that we bought in front of the shops, but it's just short-term parking. So I'm puzzled by, and I know I've mentioned this before too, this area, why we're in that game.
It is inherent in our agreements with the developers that were made at the time, not that we would purchase the land for car parking. I've factored, as I've said, they are costing estimates. I've factored in some negotiation with developers around the car park funding, but that's still to be undertaken.
Councillor Dave,
Yep.
I think you're making a really good point, and what made me even more nervous was when I got contact from, or I heard that the school were really looking forward to our parking going in so that their pupils could park their cars on our car park all day because there wasn't enough room at their school. So, and that made me a little bit nervous that we were building a school car park. And so I have included in the motion that we have 2 hours for parking, and then it would kick in as a similar model to what we have in the CBD, because I can see that we're going to be building car parks for other people otherwise to park all day.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that point, but I think we're already, even with that, we're building car parks for other people, which so I want to know where was this, how did this original agreement come to be signed? Because I can't ever recall around this table a discussion of us providing car parking as part of our agreement with the developers out there. I mean, the design of the place, yes.
It's in our land purchase. So with our land, with the land negotiations, we purchase land for car parks. So it's fairly silent on who, it is silent on who develops those, but I have factored that into the high-level costings that we'd work together on that.
Thanks, Helen. So if it's silent on who develops the car parks, we've purchased it. It seems like just the purchase of the land is a significant contribution to the car parking there, and surely at the very least we should say to the, and I'm asking you, should we not be saying to the retail centre developers, the commercial ones, we've got the land, you build the car parks, because at the moment the cost of that's in our 18 million.
The number of car parks in the town centre have been factored on, like the retail obviously, but also the community facilities. So a portion of those, do service the facilities, including the sports park as well as the aquatic facility and the library. So it takes that into account. Then there's the on-street parking. So the developers are contributing to both the supermarket and roadside. The road. There's a portion.
There's a lot of other
commitment there.
Retail outfits in this area other than just the supermarket, aren't there? So how many car parks do we currently provide at our busiest suburban library, Chartwell? Roughly.
I can't answer that.
It's about 20, is it?
Yeah.
About 20. There's a heck of a lot more than 20 in here. And then the aquatic centre, if we're actually looking at a PPP in there, why would we be providing the car parking? Why wouldn't either the PPP or the full private model be supplying that as part of their development?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we still, it's in its infancy. Hear what you're saying. I think a lot of the detail needs to be worked out as we go forward with detailed design, with negotiations, those sorts of things. I just think we probably need a bit of wriggle room so we can, and obviously all this would come back as part of a business case to council, the detailed design. We have briefings with councillors, so we're more than happy to pick up on those points rather than trying to solve them now. I don't have all the answers to that.
Maybe I could ask this question then, what proportion, again, rough ballpark figure of the 18 million would the cost of providing the car parks be anticipated to look like?
Currently it's 2.5.
2.5.
Yep.
So that's the quantum that I'm talking about, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
And just once we've done the sums, and it might be a lot less once we, do what you're talking about, Councillor Dave, is talk to the developers and that sort of thing. The other thing is what we did, looking at the town square and taking that 2 million out for the ones we've looked at, we had pretty conservative estimates in there around making sure that there was sufficient budget to meet the design needs required by the district plan and that sort of thing. But we're happy to come back, and obviously if it's less than the 18 million, it can be adjusted once we've done that design, when we bring a business case back.
When's roughly that due, Lance?
Be year one of, so if it was approved, then we'd be looking at getting on with that pretty quickly, probably this time next year, or early 2019.
Okay, thanks. Just on the 2.4 million DCs that we've already collected, we're still collecting DCs for this project, aren't we?
No, we're not. We can't do it under the current legislation. So
because it's
an amenity in the current legislation. If you're
part of it's the town square and the which is an active space, linked to the transport thing. Why wouldn't we be collecting it for that? I understand the buildings. I understand the argument.
Yep. So I need to check the detail on that, and I'll follow that up, Councillor Dave.
Okay, thanks.
Well, we're not collecting it because there's no project on the LTP, the current LTP, the 2015 LTP.
That's right. There's only the pool and the library.
So if we did decide to collect things that weren't counted as community, have in the design things that weren't counted as community facilities, like the roads we've got in here and the parking and things like that, they could be charged against DCs from 1 July onwards?
They could be, Councillor Dave, if they meet the definition, yes.
Yep, that's correct. Thanks. And the design footprint that's showing in that map on page, so I've got the 289, how much locked in is that? And the reason I'm asking that is because 3 or 4 of us saw a community in Paulsville suburb in Christchurch, also a new suburb, where the aquatic centre and the library and the community building were all part of the one and the same complex, and it seemed to work exceptionally well together, and these are about as far apart as you can get.
There would be some planning requirements that would potentially need to meet, but there is some wriggle room in terms of footprint of those facilities, and would include some of those options in a business case.
Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
Councillor Leo.
I might have the name wrong here, but I call it BP Rototuna, which is on the intersection there of Thomas Road and Hukanui Road. And you've got a countdown there, you've got a Palmer's Garden Centre there, you've got New World. How far is that from, and I always thought it was Rototuna Shopping Centre, but I may be wrong. How far is that from this proposal? Distance-wise?
Couple of 2.5 kilometres as a crow flies. A little bit more, might be 3.
Okay, thanks.
Over by Hamilton Christian School, Leo, between there and the high school.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to work out distance, you know. Just wondering how many supermarkets we actually need, you know.
Councillor Siggy.
It's true.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few questions. The Te Amudu one, does it include community rooms as well? Okay.
Yes.
How many do they have
as you
there?
can see, have you got the hand? Yeah, got the handout there. Yeah. So if you look at the bottom photograph on the left-hand side of that, where it sort of narrows down a bit, there's community meeting room in there with kitchenette facilities.
Okay.
We'd be looking at probably a large room and a smaller room. Their occupancy is, yeah, it's very. I mean, the percentage of occupancy of that room, it's used all the time basically, and then, so it's been very popular, bearing in mind also from the comment before that, this is across the road from their aquatic facility as well, and adjacent to a park where you can see that green space in the second photograph on the left.
Okay. Because although I live in Hamilton City Council, I get the Te Amudu Courier 3 times a week, and they were opposed to that library for quite a long time because they thought it was a time waster, a money waster, sorry. And do you know, has that perception changed now?
Significantly, yes. We asked, when we went there and spoke to the librarians, they mentioned that, and they said that since it's been open, they've had people who express those opinions who are coming in and are actually regular users now, and they've used both the community room and also the library facility itself. So perception's changed quite significantly since it's been open.
Oh, that sounds great. The other thing is just, so who developed this town centre? Is that with the developers? You're working with the developers on the town centre and the way it's set out and laid out? So
that's correct.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all.
Councillor Mark.
Quickly, just to reinforce the answer you gave to Dave, so you could quite conceivably join the library, community rooms and pool complex together, and you'd be able to give us the costings on what they would save and create?
You could. I mean, you could, you know, do any number of things, but yes, we'd have to give you costings, and it might change. It depends what whether a potential developer would want to, what they'd want the pool space, etc. So it could increase or decrease the costs.
So it's an indoor pool as opposed to an
Yes.
outdoor pool? Okay, cool.
So we'd be looking at the minimum of a learn to swim facility.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, we're in debate. Mayor Martin.
Yes, 3 years ago, some councillors recall we were making sure we were saving our libraries. And it's really nice to see with this administration, this is a very historic moment. Normally I've just seconded motions in my office as Deputy Mayor. This one I'm delighted and privileged to second it in person. And I noticed the presence in the room of our head librarian, and I'd say to her that your predecessor is looking there from up high now, and she will be extremely pleased at the vision that this mayor, this new mayor, this council is showing. This is a huge win for the northeast of this city. This is a huge win for the community. This is a huge win for the library services, and gives the absolute lie to any criticism that this mayor have endured as being some narrow-minded business person who has a business on Greenwood Street or wherever. This is pretty good. This is a community-minded mayor who is addressing the needs of our community, and particularly addressing the long overdue needs of the North East. So it's with great pleasure I second this motion.
Thank you. Councillor James.
This is something we've actually promised the northeast of Hamilton for some time now. I think my calculations, you've got over 7,000 households that live in that area or in the near vicinity that contribute around about $21 million a year to the Hamilton City rate take. So if you put it like that, they pay for their own way in 1 year, they pay for this. So this is something we have promised for a very long time. It will be utilised. There are so many groups in the northeast there that can use this. You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. And there will be parts of Hamilton that would be very displeased that a new centre like this is being built in the northeast. But it's something that they haven't had for a very long time. You have to remember there are over 7,000 households out there that do pay a lot of rates to the city. So this is one motion I can support.
Councillor Siggy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm really excited about this. This is a purpose-built library and community centre, and it's really refreshing to see that, because the libraries, none of them in Hamilton have been purpose-built. They've just been stuck into other buildings. And seeing the one that we've just seen in Christchurch, a purpose-built one with a very exciting community hub, and the pool right there, there's some savings to be made having it close by. You don't have to pay for extra staff for a starter. Was just really, really wonderful to see. And especially in Rotorua, in that area, there's a lot of immigrants living there. And for them, it's a community hub and a library is the first thing to go to. That's something they know about from their country. They feel comfortable to go to that and meet other people. Because in today's world, community does not happen over the fence, as they are obviously too high nowadays. And we're not over 2 meters tall anymore. Well, we've never been. Wow, and so creating that community hub for people is just a really a step forward for creating actually a community in our city. So I'm really excited about it, and I will support that.
Councillor Paula.
Oh, thank you. I'm also supporting this going forward for the similar reasons to Councillor Casson. This has been promised, and we've got to deliver on our expectations to the community. But I really am quite excited that this offers us the opportunity to deliver a smart, compact community hub, and to roll out some new ways of thinking about libraries and community spaces. And I hope we can really demonstrate through this project that you can do really good outcomes for quite low amounts of money. And, you know, I'm really very hopeful that the pool comes into this as well, because I think then you've got the whole suite of community activities, and will really give life to what at the moment is the edge of a very large housing area with very little else to go. on. So, yeah, no, that's going to be good.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm really supportive of the project and really non-supportive of the way we're going about it. I think this is something that is absolutely fit for the private sector to be doing, and absolutely the private sector would make an absolute thing. Unfortunately, I disagree with Paula. I think this is stale thinking, and this is the thinking that I've been trying to allude to all the way through, is that there are things that we can't do very well, and this is the sort of stuff I don't think we do very well. I reckon the private sector would make a much better job of this. Maybe we might want to be the tenant of the library, but I certainly don't think we want to be the landlord of the library. This is the only reason we can do this is because we have an unlimited source of income, and that's our poor old ratepayers. I think the private sector could provide this a heck of cheaper, make a heck of a lot of money at it for themselves, which is totally appropriate, and save the ratepayer millions. So unfortunately, I can't support this as this project as it is funded and as it is organised at the moment.
Councillor Leo.
Yeah, I've just had, it's just been sent to me. Google Maps shows that this is only 1.9 kilometres from what I call BP at Rototuna. Sure, we're looking at $8.5 million basically to build a car park and a library. Just down the road from there, of course, is you've got the Chartwell Library. You can get books online now. And I just query as to how many supermarkets we need, how many takeaway shops, how many retail outfits we've got. When you look around Hamilton here, you've only got to drive about 2k and run into another little complex of shopping centres and all that sort of stuff. So I can't really support this this motion going forwards.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. This is a reasonably easy one to support. The difference is people moved into this, and I've got this on record, people moved into this suburb expecting it because we said we were going to be doing it, regardless of the format in which we take. People moved into the suburb expecting it, so I see that as honouring a promise that we made. Do we want to be a city or a suburb? Do we want to be a city or a suburb? Hamilton is a unique little town, or a series of towns with city centres all over the place, unlike some of the older cities that have a massive city centre and hardly anything in the suburbs. We're quite unique in that respect. Having been to the Hallsville Centre in Christchurch, I've seen how it can work, and Leo, I'd encourage you to get down and have a look at that, or at least see what they're doing down there, because it's not like the Chartwell Library. It's big, it's open, it's a shared facility. People go between the library and the community centre and the pool. It's a really good venue for that community. I would issue a warning though, as we head towards more development potentially in Peacocks, etc. We either manage the expectation of people out there, or we a little bit earlier, because I don't want to see a situation where people have been there for 15 or 20 years, as Diana said the other day, and are waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for this thing. So we either tell them they're not getting anything out there, so they know when they're moving out there this isn't going to happen, or we deliver a little bit more quickly. But look, let's go for it. Let's get this done. I would highly recommend we join library and community centre together. I look forward to the plans going as we go. But yeah, it's a really cool project.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. Look, I've got a little bit of sympathy for some of Gary's arguments. I think our thinking and the way we set up and manage and establish these projects is sometimes a little bit old-fashioned, but only a little bit of sympathy, not a lot with Gary. The promise we made to the northeast was actually made after more than half of Rototuna was built. We didn't make the promise really until about 10 years ago, and we've been struggling to deliver it since they did make it. But the first lot of people were living out there without any sort of community facilities at all, apart from a church that someone else had built and a dairy at Flagstaff, pretty much. There was nothing else, and a police station which they closed almost as soon as they opened it. So I think one of the things that we need to start doing as a council is make sure that essential community facilities, and I'd class a library as like something like that, in a large area like this, are in place before the outfit is almost filled up, as has been happening recently. And one of the problems we've had is that government regulations on DCs don't allow us to charge development contributions for facilities like libraries. That's nuts. We used to be able to do that at the start. The last government made a terrible decision to remove that ability, and I think one of the things that our management need to be doing, and LG&Z generally, is getting the new government to actually change that regulation so we can fairly charge the developers of peacocks for the future library that's probably going to need to be put in there. Rotatuna sort of missed the boat in that sense. As far as Rotatuna, which is quite a good description of that so-called town centre down the road, it's been grown entirely by commercial decisions and hasn't delivered a good community outcome. There are a whole lot of takeaway joints around there.
Move. Seconded.
Thanks. There are a whole lot of commercial outfits there, takeaway joints and things like that. That's quite true. But this is a completely different sort of planning, and I think we'll get a completely different sort of outcome. And I guess you can't really control what develops community centres, commercial centres go. It's a bit like corner dairies. They grew all over the place. We literally had one on every major street in Hamilton in the past. Now we're getting a supermarket stuck there with lawyers sort of forcing them through the RMA process. So we're not going to have much choice of that, no matter what we probably have in the district plan.
Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this is a long overdue community asset in the northeast, and I think it was alluded to by Diana Wood that it's 26 years since the subdivision started, and you know, I still have reservations when I read the HIF funding application for the first 10 to 15 years there. We've got no provision in the development over there for any of these sorts of community assets. So we do have some really strong challenges going forward. But I'm really pleased that we've landed on a town centre and a library community hub, and we have the strong possibility of an aquatic centre which is embodied in that 10-year plan. I still think the purchase of the land and buildings is not fresh thinking and an unnecessary stretch on our debt when there are other options for financing the project that should be seriously considered. I'm pleased that the funding does include a budget for a business case to review ownership options for the community facility, and I agree with Gary that one of the upsides of the PPP regime is often those developers can build those buildings for significantly less than what they cost council and the ratepayer to build them for. So I'll be watching this space quite quickly, not to see that we don't get what's in the 10-year plan, but to see how we actually put it together and what effect it does have on our debt and this quite limited community spend fund. Thank you.
So for decades, this council has talked and promised peacocks. We've talked about turning our city around to face the river, and we've talked about amenity in the northeast. And with this vote today, we stop talking the walk and we begin walking the talk. Let's do it, guys. Let's go to the board to vote.
The motion is carried, 10 for, 2 against.
We'll stop for afternoon tea until 25 past. Alright. Yep. So it's a big paper, but I think we start now. So can we've got 2.25 hours.
Yeah, so can I suggest that we try...
That long? This is your paper. No, we don't. But it's taking at least 2 hours of paper.
So if you want to do that, I suggest maybe we try and get through those 3 big revenue